He was just a man trying to catch a flight. She was just a woman trying to survive the next 5 minutes. The airport was full of people, hundreds of them, and not one moved. Not one said a word. They looked at their phones. They looked at the ceiling. They looked at anything except what was happening right in front of them. A man's hand wrapped around a woman's wrist like a vice, her face pale, her eyes down, her body already doing what terrified bodies learn to do. Go small, go quiet, disappear. Then one man stepped forward, and nothing was ever the same again. If this story already has you, hit that like button right now and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The flight to Seattle wasn't supposed to matter. Damon Cross had taken maybe 200 flights in his adult life. Combat deployments, medevac extractions, 3 years of military contract work before he finally decided enough was enough and came home to Portland to be a father. Flights were just time he endured. He'd perfected the art of existing in transit, noise-canceling headphones, a paperback he never actually read, and the particular hollow patience of a man who'd learned to wait in worse places than an airport terminal. But today wasn't a solo trip. Dad. Lily tugged at the strap of his backpack, the one she'd decorated with iron-on patches, a narwhal, a shooting star, a tiny astronaut she'd picked out herself at the craft store on Morrison Street. Dad, I'm hungry. We just ate. That was like an hour ago. It was 40 minutes ago. That's almost an hour. He looked down at her. She was 8, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her mother's complete inability to lose an argument. And right now those eyes were looking up at him with the particular brand of calculated patience that told him she'd already decided she was getting a snack and was simply waiting for him to catch up. Fine, he said. But you're not getting the giant pretzel again. Last time you ate half of it, and I had to carry the rest through 2 concourses. I'll eat the whole thing this time. That's what you said last time. I've grown since then. He almost smiled. Almost. He reached over and adjusted the strap of her backpack, the little pink one shaped vaguely like a turtle that she'd insisted on bringing even though it barely held anything. And they moved together through the mid-morning crowd of PDX, past the Powell's bookstore kiosk and the cluster of businessmen standing around a charging station like they were gathered at a watering hole. Portland International was busy for a Tuesday. Spring break had crept into the edges of the schedule, and there were families everywhere, strollers and rolling suitcases, and children who'd clearly been awake too long and were not handling it well. Damon navigated through them with the unconscious efficiency of someone trained to move through crowded, unpredictable spaces. He didn't think about it. His body just did it. Lily chattered beside him about her best friend Maya's birthday party the previous weekend, about the cake that had been blue for some reason, about how Maya's older brother had dropped the cake and everyone had pretended not to see, but everyone had definitely seen. Damon listened, actually listened, not the half-listening he sometimes caught himself doing when the shift at the hospital had been particularly brutal. And it occurred to him, not for the first time, that this was the part of his life he'd almost missed entirely. He'd almost missed all of it. 6 years of SEAL deployments, 4 years after that of contract work, and somewhere in the middle of all that, his marriage had quietly fallen apart. Not dramatically, not with shouting or thrown dishes, just the slow erosion of 2 people who'd stopped having enough of themselves left over for each other. Maya, his ex-wife, not Lily's friend, had been patient longer than she had any obligation to be, and when she'd finally sat him down and said, "I think we've become roommates who share a daughter," he hadn't been able to argue. The custody arrangement was clean. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, every major holiday negotiated with the calm pragmatism of people who respected each other too much to make their daughter a weapon. It worked. Most days it worked fine. Some days, particularly on the first morning of his off weeks when the apartment felt like a held breath, it didn't work at all. But today was a good day. Today, he had Lily, and they were going to Seattle to see his sister Renee and her kids, and Lily was going to spend 3 days eating too much sugar and running around Renee's backyard, and Damon was going to sit on his sister's porch and drink coffee and talk to another adult about things that weren't medical charts or shift schedules. He needed that. He'd been burning at both ends for 2 months, back-to-back overnight trauma shifts at OHSU, a continuing education certification he'd promised his supervisor he'd have done by April, and a plumbing situation in his apartment bathroom that had required 4 separate plumber visits and was apparently still not fully resolved. He was tired in the specific way that wasn't about sleep, that deeper kind of tired, the kind that lived in the chest. "Dad, pretzel place." He steered them toward the food court. They were standing in line, Lily studying the menu with the intensity of a surgeon reviewing an imaging scan, when Damon heard it. Not a scream, not immediately. It was more like the quality of the noise around him changed, the way sound bends around something wrong. He looked up without thinking about looking up. 20, maybe 25 feet away, near the gate seating area for a United flight to San Francisco. A man and a woman. The man was standing very close to the woman. Too close. In the way that isn't intimacy, but it's opposite. The way that's about taking up someone else's space until they have none left. He was tall, maybe 40, dressed in the particular way that announced money. Charcoal blazer, open collar, the kind of haircut that required professional maintenance. He was leaning in close to the woman's ear, and his hand was around her wrist. The woman was beautiful in the way that well-lit magazine covers are beautiful. Polished, composed, every element exactly placed. Dark hair pulled back, a structured coat that probably cost more than Damon's monthly rent, understated jewelry. But her face right now had nothing to do with any of that. Her face was doing what he'd learned to recognize across years of emergency medicine, and before that across years of threat assessment. It was doing the involuntary math of someone calculating how to minimize harm. Chin slightly down, shoulders pulled in, eyes not meeting his. The man said something else, too low for Damon to hear across the ambient noise, and her free hand went to her bag like she was going to take something out, and the man's hand on her wrist tightened. Damon could see the whitening of his knuckles from where he stood. Nobody moved. He clocked it automatically, the way he always clocked rooms. There were maybe 60, 70 people within direct sightline of this. Gate seating, food court overflow, people passing through. A pair of teenagers looking at their phones. A family unpacking sandwiches from a paper bag. A businessman reading a tablet. A TSA agent at the far end of the terminal walking the other direction. Nobody moved. He'd seen this before. Not in airports. In other contexts, other countries, other kinds of spaces where something terrible was happening in plain view, and everyone had collectively decided they weren't sure what they were seeing, or that someone else would handle it, or that getting involved was a bad idea. Bystander geometry. He understood it. He did not have patience for it. "Lily." He put his hand on her shoulder. "Stand right here. Don't move. I'll be back in 60 seconds. She looked up from the menu, read his face. His daughter was 8, but she was perceptive the way kids who've grown up around a parent with a complicated history tend to be. She picked up on things. "Okay," she said simply. "Not why or where are you going, just okay." He crossed the 25 feet in maybe 5 seconds. "Hey." He said it conversationally, not loud. He wasn't trying to make a scene. He positioned himself 2 feet from the man, close enough to be in the conversation, far enough not to be immediately threatening. He looked at the woman first. "Are you all right?" The man turned. Up close, he was bigger than he'd looked from a distance. Heavy through the shoulders, a jaw that was designed to project authority, eyes that were used to winning the room. He had the specific arrogance of someone who'd never been told no in a situation where it mattered. "Excuse me," the man has said. Cold, precise. The tone of someone who has never needed to raise his voice because the volume of their money does it for them. "This is a private conversation." "I can see that." Damon kept his voice level. He wasn't performing calm. He was calm. The specific settled kind that came from having been in situations where the wrong inflection could kill someone. "I was asking her." The woman's eyes came up. For a second, just a fraction of a second, something moved across her face. Surprise, maybe? Or the particular disorientation of someone who had stopped expecting people to ask. "She's fine," the man said. "She can answer for herself." The man's chin came up fractionally. Assessment. He was looking at Damon the way men of a certain type look at obstacles, calculating what it would cost to remove them. What he found in Damon's face apparently gave him a moment of pause, because the calculation took a beat longer than it should have. Damon was not a large man in the way that announces itself. He was 6 feet, maybe 30 pounds over what he'd carried on deployments, shoulders that had kept their breadth even after he'd stopped training for combat. He wasn't standing in any particular way. He didn't have his hands up or his chest out. He was just standing there, quietly, and looking at the man with the patient attention of someone who had absolutely nowhere else to be and was very comfortable in this specific kind of silence. "Marcus?" The woman's voice. Quiet. "Let go of my wrist." "Celeste." "Let go." The man, Marcus, released her wrist. Slowly, like it was his decision, like he was doing her a favor. He straightened his jacket with one hand and turned the full wattage of his attention on Damon. And what was in his eyes now wasn't fear or embarrassment or the decent human response to being caught doing something cruel in public. It was annoyance, like Damon was a delay on his schedule. "You need to mind your own business," Marcus said. "You're right," Damon said. "Generally speaking, but when something happens in public, in front of other people, it becomes a little bit everybody's business." "Do you have any idea who I am?" Damon looked at him. Let the silence breathe for a second. "No," he said. "Should I?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He leaned in, dropping his voice to something that was probably meant to be intimidating. "You just made a very serious mistake." "Okay." Damon didn't move. "Was there something else?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then two things happened almost simultaneously. An airport security officer appeared at the edge of Damon's peripheral vision, responding to some alert or complaint he hadn't seen get filed, and Marcus took one step back. Just one. Enough to establish that he was done with this on his terms, not anyone else's. He looked at the woman, Celeste, with an expression that Damon recognized from a different context entirely. The look of someone filing information away for later, the specific look of someone who doesn't forget. "This isn't over," Marcus said. Not to Damon, to her. Then he turned and walked away toward the gate, pulling out his phone before he'd taken 3 steps. The security officer arrived, young, maybe 25, trying to read the situation. "Is there a problem here?" "I don't think so," Damon said. "You might want to keep an eye on that guy, though." He gestured in the direction Marcus had gone. He had his hands on this woman. The officer looked at Celeste. "Ma'am, do you need assistance?" Celeste Sterling looked at the security officer, then at Damon, then at her own wrist, where, even from where he stood, Damon could see the beginning of bruising starting to bloom against pale skin. She looked like she was doing the same calculation she'd been doing before, the one about minimizing harm, except now the variables had changed and she didn't quite know what the answer was. She stopped, started again. "I think I missed my flight." She had, in fact, missed her flight. This was discovered when she looked at her phone, which had several missed calls, all from the same number, all from the last 8 minutes, and then at the departures board, which showed her San Francisco flight as departed in the cheerful orange font of things that have already happened without you. Damon had collected Lily, who had used the 60 seconds, it had been significantly more than 60 seconds, to acquire a pretzel the size of her head from a sympathetic counterworker who had clearly watched the whole scene from behind the food court and had feelings about it. Lily ate the pretzel and studied Celeste with the frank, unfiltered curiosity of an 8-year-old. "Did that man hurt you?" Lily asked. "Lily," Damon said. "What?" "I'm asking." Celeste looked at her. Something shifted in her expression. The polished composure cracked, just at the edges. "A little," she said, which was, Damon suspected, a masterpiece of understatement. "He looked mean," Lily said. "His face was mean." "Lily, I'm just saying what I saw." Celeste almost laughed. It came out wrong. Too sharp, a little ragged, but it was closer to a laugh than anything else. "You're not wrong," she said. They were sitting in the gate, seating now, the 3 of them, because the security officer had taken a statement and asked Celeste if she wanted to file a formal complaint, and she'd said she needed to think about it, which the officer had interpreted correctly as not right now and given her a card. Marcus's flight had departed 15 minutes before. He'd been on a different itinerary, a detail Damon filed away without knowing why. Celeste sat with her phone in both hands like it was something she wasn't sure she trusted. There were still calls coming in. She'd started declining them. Is there someone you can call? Damon asked. Friend, family member, someone who can... I'm fine, she said. The words came out on reflex, the automatic reassurance of someone who'd said them so many times they no longer required thought. Then she caught herself. Her jaw tightened. She looked at her wrist. My assistant is in San Francisco. She stopped. I was supposed to be on that flight. What's your next option? She pulled up her airline app. He watched her face as she scrolled, the slight tightening around her eyes that told him the options were not good. There's a flight to San Francisco at 7:40 tonight, she said. Or I could... She stopped scrolling. He's staying at the Marriott near the airport, she said, more to herself than to him. He knows which hotel I'm booked at. Damon didn't say anything. I need to... She scrolled more. There's a hotel near the terminal that might have availability. At spring break rates, Damon said. She looked up. I can afford a hotel room. I know you can. He said it simply, no edge to it. I'm just saying. She looked at him for a moment. Really looked at him. The first time he thought she'd actually looked at him since the whole thing started, rather than looking at the general space around him while her attention was somewhere else entirely. He could see the moment she really took him in. Jeans, hiking boots, navy blue Henley that had seen better days, a messenger bag that functioned as both his carry-on and his daughter's emergency supply depot. A man who looked like what he was, someone who'd been doing something demanding for a long time and had the particular worn quality that came from it. Why did you do that? She asked. Step in, Lily answered before he could. Because that's what you're supposed to do, she said, with the breezy authority of someone who has not yet learned that this is not, in fact, what most people do. Out of the mouths of babes, Damon said. Lily threw a piece of pretzel at him. What? He offered the couch. It came out slightly differently than he'd planned, which was that he hadn't planned it at all. They'd been sitting in the gate area for another 40 minutes, Lily drawing on the back of a boarding pass she'd found in his bag. Celeste making several phone calls in a low, tightly controlled voice that told him the calls were not going well, and when she hung up on the last one and sat very still for a moment with her eyes closed, he'd just said it. I live about 20 minutes from here, he said. You can take the couch if you need somewhere to be tonight. It's not much, but it's not the Marriott, which means he doesn't know about it. She opened her eyes, looked at him. You don't know me. No. I could be anyone. You could, he agreed. That's an extremely strange offer from a complete stranger. Yeah, he said. It probably is. She looked at Lily, who had fallen asleep sideways across 2 seats with her head on her turtle backpack, her pretzel abandoned 3/4 eaten on the seat beside her, exactly as predicted. Your daughter, Celeste said. She'll be fine with it. She has opinions about everyone. She's already decided you're okay. How do you know? She gave you some of her pretzel. Celeste looked at the small piece of pretzel sitting on the armrest between them. Lily had pressed it on her about 20 minutes ago with the no-nonsense generosity of a child who has decided you look like you need feeding. She picked it up, ate it. It was cold and a little chewy, and probably the most expensive pretzel bite per emotional context she'd ever consumed. Okay, she said. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in northeast Portland that had been built in the 1970s and had the architectural personality of a man who'd stopped caring about impressing people somewhere around 1978. Beige carpet, a door that stuck in the upper left corner if you didn't lean into it, a hallway that smelled vaguely of someone else's dinner, something with garlic and tomato that was actually pretty good. Celeste Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global Technologies, with an apartment in Pacific Heights, a penthouse suite she kept in Manhattan for board meetings, and a vacation property in Lake Tahoe that she'd been to exactly twice in 3 years, carried a single leather weekender bag up 3 flights of stairs, and said nothing about any of this. Kitchen's through there, Damon said, dropping his bag by the door. Bathroom's down the hall. The water pressure is fine, but the hot water takes about 90 seconds to get going, just so you know. Okay. You drink coffee? Please. Lily had woken up in the car and was now moving through her evening routine with the methodical efficiency she'd developed entirely on her own. Shoes by the door, backpack hung on her hook, hands washed, stationed at the kitchen table waiting for dinner with the patient optimism of someone who has complete faith in the process. Damon started water for pasta, the default when he hadn't had time to think about dinner, and Lily explained to Celeste, who had sat down across from her somewhat carefully, like she wasn't entirely sure of the protocol, that the narwhal patch on her backpack was specifically a narwhal and not a unicorn horse, as one of her classmates had claimed. "A narwhal is a real animal," Lily said. "I know," Celeste said. "They live in Arctic waters." Lily stared at her. "You know about narwhals?" "I do." "Most adults say they're like a unicorn of the sea, but that's not accurate because they're actually related to belugas." "That's right." Lily looked at Damon with an expression that clearly communicated she was revising her opinion of this visitor upward. Damon, who was grating cheese over a pan, took note of this without comment. Dinner was pasta with jarred marinara sauce that he'd improved with a heavy hand of garlic and some basil from the small pot on the windowsill. He put bread in the toaster. He poured Celeste coffee from the French press, and she took it with both hands and drank it like someone who'd needed it for several hours. They ate. It was strange is what it was. Strange in a way that wasn't bad. Just strange. Celeste sat at his kitchen table in her expensive coat that she hadn't taken off yet, and ate pasta with his daughter, who was telling her about a science project involving the water cycle that had gone, in Lily's assessment, okay but not amazing. And Celeste listened and asked questions that were actually good questions. Questions that took the topic seriously rather than performing interest in it. And Lily's assessment upgraded again, visibly. "She's good with her," Damon said when Lily had gone to get her pajamas and he was clearing the table. Celeste looked up. She seemed to realize, slightly late, that she'd been watching Lily leave with an expression that was harder to read than anything she'd shown him all day. "She's extraordinary," she said. "The way she thinks, how she talks. She talks constantly. I know, I like it." He brought the dishes to the sink. She got up and brought hers, too, which wasn't something everyone did. A lot of people were guests in a way that expected the host to handle the full transaction. And she stood beside him at the sink while he ran the water, and there was a moment of companionable near silence, just the water and the distant sound of Lily somewhere down the hall talking to herself. "Thank you," she said, quietly. "For dinner." "For—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing the apartment, the evening, the entire day. "It's pasta from a jar. I know what it is. Most people at your level don't eat pasta from a jar." She looked at him. "What level do you think I'm at?" "I looked you up," he said. "While Lily was asleep in the car, Sterling Global. You're the CEO. A breath. "Yes." "Your company does about $14 billion in annual revenue. Give or take." "And your fiancé?" "Former," she said. The word came out flat and hard, like something that had been sitting in her chest all day waiting to be said. "Former fiancé," he corrected. "He's on the board?" She turned to look at him fully. Her face had changed. The polished composure had come back, but differently. The way a face looks when the composure isn't performance but armor, when there's something underneath it that the person knows is vulnerable and is actively choosing to protect. "How do you know that?" "I don't. I'm asking." A pause. She set down the dish she was holding. "He's not just on the board," she said. "He's been systematically positioning himself on the board for the past 18 months, placing people, replacing people. I didn't—" She stopped. "I didn't see it clearly until recently. What it added up to." "What does it add up to?" She looked at him for a long moment. He could see the calculus happening, the assessment of whether to say the actual thing or the managed version of the actual thing, the version that doesn't require trusting someone you met 7 hours ago. "He wants the company," she said. "He's been building toward a position where he can push me out and take control of it. The engagement was—" Another stop, this one harder. "The engagement was part of the strategy." Damon didn't say anything. He turned off the water and dried his hands on the dish towel and let the silence do its work. "I sound like an idiot," she said. "You sound like someone who was close to a situation and couldn't see it clearly," he said. "That's not the same thing. I run a company that employs 12,000 people. I'm supposed to see things clearly. That's your professional life. This is different." He folded the towel and set it on the counter. "People with good professional judgment get manipulated by people they love. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's just how being human works. She looked at him. Were you military, she asked. Before the medical work. SEAL, 6 years active, 4 contract. She absorbed this. It's a long time ago, he said, which was true in some ways and completely untrue in others, but he didn't feel like getting into the granular version. Does it? She hesitated. Does it bother you? What you saw? What people do? He thought about this. He didn't give her the easy answer, which was that you got used to it, which wasn't true. He thought about the specific geometry of what she was asking. What people do to each other, in public, in private, with witnesses, or without. It used to make me angry, he said. For a long time it made me angry. Now it mostly just makes me... He searched for the word. Deliberate. I try to be deliberate about what I do about it. She was quiet for a moment. Down the hall, Lily called, Dad, pajamas. But also I need to ask you something about the water cycle project. He looked at Celeste. That's going to be a while. Go, she said. I'm fine. He went. He spent 20 minutes with Lily working through a question about evaporation that was actually a well-disguised question about why some things disappear and some things don't, which was the kind of conversation that happened regularly between them and that he navigated imperfectly, but tried hard. He got her settled, found the extra blankets for the couch, brought them out to where Celeste was sitting on the couch with her shoes off and her legs tucked under her phone dark in her lap. Blankets, he said. The couch is actually comfortable. I've slept on it enough to know. Why do you sleep on the couch? When Lily has nightmares and takes over the bed. Something crossed her face, something careful and warm and quickly managed. She has nightmares? Sometimes. She's a kid. Kids have nightmares. He set the blankets on the arm of the couch. You can use the bathroom first. There's a spare toothbrush under the sink. Lily insists we always have spare toothbrushes. She has theories about preparedness. Celeste looked up at him. In the low light of the living room, with her coat finally off and her hair coming slightly loose from whatever had been holding it, she looked less like a CEO and more like a person who'd had a very long day and was not entirely sure what came next. There was something around her eyes that she'd been holding back all evening, and now, in the quiet apartment with the sounds of the neighborhood coming through the window, someone's TV, a car that needed a new muffler, the ambient rumble of northeast Portland at 9 o'clock. It was harder to hold. I have to go back, she said. Tomorrow. To the company. To the board situation. I need to do something about this, and I've been... She exhaled slowly. I've been not doing something about it for about 6 weeks. Since I figured it out. I've been waiting, he said. Afraid, she said, which was clearly the actual word in which she said like it cost something. Those are sometimes the same thing. She looked at him. That's either very wise or very obvious. Probably both, he said. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's still going to be there in the morning. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to his apartment the way he'd learned to listen in other kinds of dark. Not waiting for threats, just taking inventory. Lily breathing down the hall. The faint movement of someone on the couch, the creak of settling in. The muffler car again, farther away this time. He'd been in this apartment for 2 years. He'd built a life in it that was small and deliberate and mostly good, and tonight it held one extra person who was going to need to do something very hard. And he didn't know yet what role, if any, he was going to play in that. He'd learned not to assume. He'd learned that the instinct to step forward was one thing, and what happened after was a different and more complicated thing. But he'd stepped forward in that airport, and he'd do it again, and that was probably all that needed to be true about it right now. Down the hall, Lily made a small sound. Not a nightmare, just the sound of a child deeply asleep. He turned onto his side. Outside, Portland continued in its ordinary way, indifferent and familiar and home. In the living room, Celeste Sterling lay in the dark with her eyes open, her wrist beginning to ache where the bruise was settling in, her phone charging on the floor beside her, and the first clear thought she'd had in 6 weeks taking slow shape in her chest, like something surfacing from deep water. She had to go back. She knew what was waiting there, and for the first time in a long time, she thought she might not go back alone. She woke before the apartment did. The couch, as advertised, was genuinely comfortable, firmer than she'd expected, with a quilt that smelled like fabric softener and something else, something warm and lived in that she couldn't name and didn't try to. She lay still for a few minutes, listening to a building she didn't know. The refrigerator's hum, pipes somewhere in the walls doing what pipes do at 5 in the morning, the faint sound of traffic beginning to build on whatever street ran below the window. Northeast Portland. She'd been to Portland maybe a dozen times for conferences and corporate retreats, always the same circuit of the same hotels and the same Riverview restaurants. And she'd never once been in a neighborhood like this one, a neighborhood that was just a neighborhood. An ordinary place where ordinary things happened. Her wrist ached. She looked at it in the gray pre-dawn light coming through the curtains. The bruising had fully settled overnight, a band of purple and yellow around the bone that she looked at for a moment without the particular talent for minimizing that she'd developed over the past year and a half. She didn't minimize it. She just looked at it, the way you sometimes need to look at a thing clearly before you can decide what to do with it. She sat up. Her phone had charged overnight and now held 17 new messages, which she scrolled through without reading, cataloging the senders. 3 from her assistant Diana, 4 from her head of legal, Priya Nair, which was more than the usual morning volume and meant something had already broken in the direction of bad. 2 from board members whose names made her stomach tighten, Hargrove and Wills, both of whom she'd known for 3 years and trusted, or thought she'd trusted, which was starting to feel like the same error she'd been making in multiple directions. And 6 from Marcus. 6. The last one sent at 2:14 in the morning, which was the kind of detail that told her something useful about his current state of mind. She didn't open any of them. She sat on Damon's couch in the gray morning quiet and did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She sat with the discomfort of not knowing what was going to happen next. She didn't make a call. She didn't draft a response. She didn't open her laptop and start assembling information into a strategy. She just sat with it. It lasted about 4 minutes. Then she heard the coffee grinder from the kitchen and footsteps, and Damon Cross appeared in the doorway in gray sweatpants and a faded t-shirt from some 10K race in 2019, his hair doing something complicated on one side, squinting slightly the way people do when they're fully functional, but not yet entirely willing to admit it. He looked at her, took in the fact that she was awake, that she'd been sitting in the dark alone. If he had thoughts about this, he kept them organized somewhere behind his expression. "Coffee," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. He went back to the kitchen. She followed because sitting alone on the couch now felt more uncomfortable than wherever he was going. His kitchen was small and slightly disorganized in the specific way of a person who cooked real food, but didn't care about aesthetics. A good knife block, a cast iron pan on the stove with some kind of scrubbed clean darkness that spoke to serious use, a counter that held a French press, a canister of coffee, a half-full bag of rice, a child's drawing held to the refrigerator by a magnet that said Portland Trailblazers. The drawing appeared to be a narwhal, possibly in space. "She's been on a narwhal phase for about 4 months," he said, following her gaze. He pressed the coffee and poured 2 mugs. Before that, it was penguins. Before penguins, it was a very specific interest in volcanoes that caused me to buy 4 books about volcanoes and watch approximately 11 hours of volcano documentaries. That sounds exhausting. It was actually great. I know a lot about volcanoes now. He handed her a mug. "You sleep?" "Some." "Your wrist okay?" She'd pulled her sleeve down without thinking about it. She glanced at the covered wrist, then at him. "It's fine." He looked at her with the particular expression she was starting to recognize, the one that was neither skeptical nor pressing, just patient, the expression of someone who has heard a lot of people say fine when they didn't mean it, and has learned that arguing with the word is less useful than just leaving the space around it open. "I need to call my legal team this morning," she said, "before the New York market opens." "Okay. And I need to book a flight." "Okay." "The 7:40 tonight probably still has seats." "Probably." He drank his coffee. "You have somewhere to stay in San Francisco? He's not at your apartment?" "He has a key," she said. The words came out in a way that she hadn't intended. Too flat, too small. She heard them and then heard herself hearing them, and something in her chest did something unpleasant. Damon was quiet for a beat. "Do you need to have someone there when you go back? A friend, a family member?" "I have people," she said. which was true in the technical sense. Diana, her assistant, who was more than an assistant in the ways that counted. Priya, her legal chief. A few people from her Stanford years who she still had dinner with twice a year. But saying I have people, and meaning I have people I can call at 7 in the morning, and say I need you to come to my apartment because I am afraid to go back there alone, were two statements that had very different shapes, and she wasn't sure. Standing in Damon Cross's kitchen with his coffee and his Trailblazers magnet, how many of those people she actually had. Good, he said. Not pressing, not pushing, just the word, flat and sincere, like he was taking her at her word because he'd decided to. She wanted to explain. She wasn't sure what she wanted to explain exactly, that she knew how she must look. A woman who ran a company worth $14 billion, standing in a stranger's kitchen at 5:30 in the morning because she was afraid to be in a hotel where someone who'd spent 18 months systematically gutting everything she'd built might know to find her. The cognitive dissonance of that had kept her awake longer than she'd admitted. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "At the airport, when you came over." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "You didn't know me. You didn't know if there were people with him or if he was—" "No," he said. "So you just—" "Yeah." She looked at him. "That's a very unsatisfying answer." "I know." He leaned against the counter. "I've been trying to find a better one for about 15 years. The honest version is that I was trained for a long time to respond to certain situations in certain ways, and eventually the training stops being training and just becomes the way you are. I saw something wrong, and I moved toward it. I didn't think about it. You weren't scared?" He thought about this seriously, which she was starting to appreciate, that he treated her questions like they were worth the consideration rather than giving her the managed version immediately. "A little," he said, "but scared isn't the same as stopped. The two can happen at the same time." She held that for a moment. From somewhere down the hall there was movement, the distinctive shuffle of a child transitioning from sleep to consciousness. And then Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajamas featuring what appeared to be small dinosaurs wearing sunglasses, hair in a configuration that suggested sleep had been genuinely committed to, looking at both of them with the specific satisfaction of someone who had suspected they might find something interesting in the kitchen and had been correct. "You're both awake," she announced. "We're adults," Damon said. "Adults get up early." "Why?" "Because we have to." "That sounds bad," Lily said. She looked at Celeste. "Did you sleep okay?" "The couch has a spring that pokes sometimes if you're on the wrong side." "I was on the right side," Celeste said. "Good." Lily nodded, satisfied with this outcome, and climbed onto a kitchen stool. "Can we have eggs?" "We can have eggs," Damon said. "The kind with the cheese?" "What other kind is there?" Lily seemed to consider this a reasonable philosophical position and began rearranging the items on the counter in front of her. The salt shaker, a small ceramic jar of something, a water bottle, in a pattern that appeared to have internal logic that she alone understood. Celeste watched her and felt something happen in her chest that she didn't have a precise word for. Not envy, exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something that had to do with the particular quality of this kitchen, this morning, the functional disorganization of it, the coffee and the dinosaur pajamas, and the easy back and forth between a father and his daughter, the way the whole thing ran on something that had nothing to do with money or strategy or positioning. She'd grown up in a house with more money than this, significantly more, and it had been, on balance, a cold house, beautiful and cold, the kind of place where things were maintained rather than lived in, where success was discussed constantly and warmth came in managed doses. She'd thought for a long time that this was just what households were, that the warm ones were television, that they required a particular kind of luck she didn't have access to. Damon cracked eggs into a bowl. Lily stole a piece of bread from the loaf on the counter. Celeste sat at the kitchen table and drank her coffee and was, for 22 minutes, not a CEO. It was the strangest 22 minutes she'd had in recent memory. And then her phone rang. Priya's name, and she was back. She took the call in the hallway, keeping her voice low by instinct. Priya spoke for 4 minutes without stopping. Precise, rapid, each sentence a coordinate on a map that Celeste was building as she listened. The audit committee had requested an emergency meeting. Two board members had been approached. By whom and with what Priya was still assembling, but the shape of it was becoming clear. The thing that Celeste had been watching form for 6 weeks like a storm system she'd been tracking from too far away to do anything about yet. "How bad?" Celeste said when Priya took a breath. "Bad enough that if you're not in the room Friday, I think they move without you." "What's Friday?" Hargrove called a special session. Agenda item is listed as Strategic Leadership Review. I've seen that language used once before, and it wasn't... I know what it means. Celeste pressed her back against the hallway wall. The wallpaper was slightly peeling at the seam near the light switch. She stared at this specific detail while she thought. Who filed the audit request? That's the thing. It came from inside the governance committee. It's not Marcus directly. That his fingerprints aren't on it. It's Will's. Well, Will's works for Marcus. I know that. We need to be able to say that with documentation rather than just knowing it. I know, Celeste said. I've been working on that. I need more time. A pause on the other end. Celeste, you have until Thursday. She closed her eyes, opened them, the wallpaper seam, the light switch. I'll be back today, she said. Book me on the first flight you can get. I don't care what it costs. And Priya, keep this between us for now. Don't loop anyone else in until I tell you. Understood. Another pause, different in texture from the first. Are you okay? I'm working on it, Celeste said, which was probably the most honest thing she'd said into a phone in 6 weeks. She hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment. From the kitchen, she could hear Lily explaining to Damon that the correct distribution of cheese and scrambled eggs was a matter of principle, not preference. She heard Damon say something in response, too low to catch. She heard Lily's laugh, bright and short and completely unself-conscious, and then the sound of a pan on the stove. She walked back in. I need to change my flight, she said. Is there somewhere I can use? Table's yours, Damon said. He slid a plate of eggs onto the counter for Lily without looking at it, his attention already moving back to the pan. Flights out of PDX to SFO run pretty much every hour. You should be able to get something mid-morning. She sat down and opened her laptop and found a 10:15 that still had business class seats, which she booked without thinking about it. She had her calendar open, her email, a document that Priya had flagged with the subject line board session materials. Preliminary. Do not forward. And she was reading through it with the kind of focused attention that could shut out almost anything, that she'd trained herself to maintain across 11 years of running a company that required her to be present for too many things at once. Almost anything. You okay over there? Damon asked. He set a plate of eggs beside her laptop. She looked at it, then at him. You didn't have to. You're a person. People eat breakfast. He sat down across from her with his own plate, and Lily climbed into the chair at the end of the table. And for a moment, the three of them just ate. And Celeste looked at the document on her screen, and then at the eggs, and then, involuntarily, at the two of them, and she thought, this is the most bizarre morning of my adult life. And then she thought, and it is also somehow fine. Tell me something, she said. Damon looked up. When you were deployed, when things were bad, what did you do with it? He chewed, thought about it. Define bad. When the situation was when you could see the shape of the problem, but not the solution. When you were up against something and didn't know yet how to get through it. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him actually consider the question rather than reaching for the easy answer. I stayed close to the next thing I could do, he said. Not the whole picture, the next specific thing, because the whole picture, when things are really bad, the whole picture will drown you, but you can usually find the next thing. She looked at him. That's more useful than you know. What's the whole picture? He asked. She looked at her laptop screen. Then she looked at Lily, who was eating eggs with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had opinions about not letting food go to waste and was acting on them. She looked back at Damon, and then, and she would not have predicted this, would not have predicted any of it, this morning, this kitchen, this man, she told him. Not the managed summary, not the version she'd been preparing for the board, the clean narrative with the documentation attached, the actual thing, the way it had happened, the slow-motion version that she'd been inside of for 18 months and could only see clearly now that she was standing slightly outside of it. She told him about meeting Marcus Hale 3 years ago at a technology conference in Austin. He'd been charming in the particular way of someone who is very good at finding what people want and giving it to them. She'd been 37, no, 27, and running a company that had just crossed $5 billion in valuation and was moving fast enough that she sometimes lost track of herself in the momentum of it. He'd been interested in her ideas, interested in her work. He'd asked the right questions and remembered the answers and called her on the things she said she'd do and hadn't done yet. In the productive way, not the controlling way at first. The engagement had come 18 months ago. She thought she was ready. She thought a lot of things about him that she had since revised. "When did you first know something was wrong?" Damon asked. "About 8 months ago," she said. "A board meeting. He made a suggestion about the governance committee structure, and 3 people responded in a way that told me they'd already discussed it with him outside the meeting. Which it's not necessarily improper, people talk, but the way they responded, the way they didn't look at me when they agreed with him." She stopped. "I sound paranoid." "You don't," he said. "I run a 12,000-person company. I'm supposed to maintain the confidence of my board. If I walk into a room and start treating legitimate business conversation as a conspiracy..." "You're describing a pattern," he said. "That's different from paranoia. Paranoia is when the pattern isn't there." She looked at him. "I'm not a therapist," he said, "but I've been in situations where the correct read on a room meant the difference between people coming home and people not coming home. What you're describing, the eye contact, the pre-coordination, the subtle realignment of alliances, that's pattern recognition. That's a skill." "I've been telling myself I was wrong," she said, "for months. Every time I was sure, I found a way to talk myself out of it." She paused. "He's very good at that. At making you feel like the problem is how you're seeing things, not what's actually there." Damon didn't say anything. He didn't fill the space with reassurance or outrage or advice. He just stayed in the silence with her, and she was beginning to understand that this was not the absence of a response, but a specific kind of response. The response of someone who has learned that being with a person in the hard part is sometimes more useful than offering them a way around it. "I have documentation," she said. "Some of it. Email chains, a series of votes in the governance committee that follow a pattern inconsistent with independent decision-making. My legal chief has been quietly pulling records for 6 weeks. Is it enough?" "I think so. I hope so." She looked at her plate. "I need to be in front of the board before Friday. There's a special session called, not by me. If I'm not there and I'm not ready, they can move to remove me. And the company council will advise them that the process is sound because Marcus has been very careful about the process being sound." "He's good at this," Damon said. "He's excellent at this," she said, and the objectivity with which she said it, the absence of bitterness, the flat and weary accuracy of it, told him more about how long she'd been carrying this than anything else she'd said. Lily had finished her eggs and was drawing something on the back of a napkin. She looked up. "What's a board meeting?" "A meeting with the company's directors," Celeste said. "The people who make big decisions about how the company runs." "Like a class vote?" "A little like that, except the stakes are higher." "What happens if you lose the vote?" Celeste glanced at Damon. He was looking at his daughter with an expression that was both fond and slightly resigned, the expression of a parent whose child regularly asks the question everyone in the room is dancing around. "Then someone else runs the company," Celeste said. Lily considered this. "That seems bad. It's your company." "Yes," Celeste said. "It is. So you have to win. That's the general idea. My dad says the only way to win something that matters is to do the work first and then go in," Lily said. "He says going in before you're ready is how people get hurt." Celeste looked at Damon. He looked at his coffee mug with the dignity of a man not taking credit for his own offspring. "That's good advice," Celeste said. "He has some," Lily said. Damon stood up and started collecting plates with the quiet efficiency of someone moving to avoid being further discussed. "What do you need this morning?" he asked. "Before your flight, what can you actually do in the next..." He checked the clock on the microwave. 3.5 hours. Celeste looked at her laptop. She looked at the document Priya had sent. She thought about the next specific thing. Not the whole picture, not the board meeting,
Not Marcus, not the company, not the 18 months of slow erosion, just the next thing. I need to call Priya back, she said.
And I need her to pull 3 specific sets of correspondence. And I need to understand what Hargrove and Wills have been given access to, because whatever they're presenting Friday came from somewhere, and I need to know the source. That's 3 things, Damon said. I know. Do those 3 things. He set the plates in the sink. You've got the table as long as you need it. She looked at him. At the ease of that, the uncomplicated way he'd just said you've got the table, no transaction around it, no calculation, just the simple fact of the offer. And she felt something shift slightly, somewhere in her chest. Not dramatically, not like something breaking, more like something that had been held at an angle for a long time, quietly finding its level. Thank you, she said. You said that already. I'm saying it again. He turned back to the sink. Noted, he said, which was the most infuriating non-response, and she found herself almost smiling at it and turned back to her laptop. She worked for 2.5 hours at his kitchen table. Lily moved around her, doing what appeared to be a hybrid of homework and artistic practice, asking questions at intervals that ranged from the completely mundane to the genuinely interesting, at one point explaining to Celeste a theory she had about why certain colors felt like certain sounds that Celeste didn't have a response to but found she couldn't stop thinking about. Damon came and went, a trip to what sounded like the building laundry room, a phone call she caught fragments of that sounded medical and professional, the quiet, ongoing logistics of a life. By 9:30, she had what she needed. Not everything, not the full picture, not the proof that would make Friday uncomplicated, but enough to walk into Priya's office and build something solid. She'd found the correspondence thread she'd been looking for, buried in a governance committee subfolder that she'd had nominal access to but hadn't examined closely. And what it showed, the timing of it, the specific language that mirrored language from Marcus's private emails to her, was not conclusive on its own, but was the kind of thing that, assembled with other pieces, became hard to dismiss. She closed the laptop. Damon was sitting across from her, reading something on his phone, giving her the privacy of his presence without the intrusion of attention. Lily had relocated to the living room and could be heard conducting what sounded like a conversation with a stuffed animal that involved significant disagreement about something. I think I have it, she said. He looked up. The next thing? The next 3 things, actually. She sat back. I know what to do when I get there. I know what to build and how to build it. Good. I still don't know if it'll be enough. That's Friday's problem, he said. Today's problem is getting there. She looked at him. There was something she wanted to say. Something about the morning, about the kitchen, about the strange grace of spending the night in someone's ordinary life and finding it more clarifying than anything she'd managed in the past 6 weeks of deliberate strategic thinking. She didn't quite have the language for it that wouldn't sound like too much, and she wasn't sure she was ready for too much, so she held it back. I should get ready, she said. My flight's at 10:15. I can drive you, he said. You don't have to. The airport's 20 minutes. He stood. Let me tell Lily. She went to the bathroom to change. She looked at her wrist in the mirror. The bruise was vivid in the light, fully committed now, the body's way of documenting what had happened in a way that didn't require a report or a filing or anyone's official acknowledgement. She photographed it, sent it to Priya with 4 words. For the record, keep. Then she looked at her own face, at the thing that was different in it from yesterday. Not better, exactly. Not resolved, but different in a way she couldn't articulate yet. Like something had been put down, and she hadn't noticed until she'd set it down and felt the difference in the weight of her own hands. She heard Lily say something in the living room, heard Damon's response, heard the small familiar back and forth of 2 people who lived in the same orbit and knew the weight of each other's rhythms. She pulled her sleeve down, picked up her bag. Time to go build something. Lily was at the door when she came out, holding a piece of paper that she thrust forward with the straightforward energy of someone presenting a gift they're confident about. Celeste took it. It was the napkin drawing from breakfast. A narwhal, done in pen with surprising precision for an 8-year-old, with a small star next to it. On the bottom, in uneven block letters, "Good luck. You got this." Celeste looked at it, looked at Lily. The star is for good luck, Lily said. I read that narwhals are the unicorns of the sea, so they're probably also lucky. I thought they were related to belugas, Celeste said. They can be both, Lily said, with the serene confidence of someone who has not yet been told that things can't be two things at once. Celeste folded the napkin and put it in the front pocket of her weekender bag, where she would find it 3 days later at a different kind of critical moment and feel something she hadn't expected to feel.
Thank you, she said. She meant it for both of them, but she looked at Damon when she said it, and he did the thing again. The quiet acknowledgement that didn't need to be a moment, that just let the moment be what it was. They drove to the airport in the early morning traffic, Lily in the back seat explaining something about the water cycle to herself, Damon driving with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were and where they were going.
Celeste sat with her bag on her lap and watched Portland go by. The ordinary streets, the coffee shops not yet open, the small houses with their small yards, the infrastructure of normal life. And she thought about what it meant to build something from the ground up, from scratch, from whatever you had. She'd done it once. She could do it again. At the departures drop-off, she got out. Damon rolled the window down. "Let me know how Friday goes," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I want to know." It was, she thought, the most uncomplicated thing anyone had said to her in a very long time. No angle. No, because I can help. No, because it affects X or Y. Just because I want to know. "I'll let you know," she said. She walked into the terminal. Behind her, she heard the car pull away. She didn't look back. She squared her shoulders, adjusted the strap of her bag, and moved toward security with the specific, purposeful stride of someone who knows exactly what they're walking into and has decided to walk in anyway. In the front pocket of her bag, folded against her phone, a napkin narwhal held its small star like a flag. The flight to San Francisco was 47 minutes. Celeste spent the first 20 of them doing what she'd been doing all morning, building, assembling, pulling the architecture of what she needed into something with structural integrity. Her laptop open on the tray table, Priya's documents spread across 3 browser tabs. A legal pad filling up with handwritten notes in the cramped shorthand she'd developed in her mid-20s when she'd learned that typing everything felt like performing work instead of doing it. The woman in the seat beside her glanced over once, saw the density of what was on the screen, and went back to her magazine with the quiet respect of someone recognizing a person who is not available. The last 20 minutes she spent looking out the window. She wasn't someone who looked out windows on planes. She worked on planes, had worked on planes for 11 years, wheels up to wheels down, every domestic flight a reclaimed hour. But today she looked out the window and watched the geography change from Oregon green to California brown, and she thought about what Damon had said in his kitchen, about the next specific thing, and she thought about the napkin in her bag, and she thought about Lily's completely confident, "You got this," delivered with the breezy authority of someone who had not yet learned to hedge. She thought, "I need to not lose this, not the company." The company was what she was flying toward, was what the next 72 hours were built around. And yes, she wanted to protect it. 12,000 people, 11 years, something she'd built from a rented server room in Palo Alto, and a team of 6 people who were all still with her, which was the fact she was most proud of out of everything, more than the valuation or the market position or the profile in the Times. But the thing she meant when she thought "I need to not lose this" wasn't the company. It was whatever had happened to her in the last 22 hours. The particular quality of clarity she'd woken up with on a stranger's couch in Northeast Portland, aching wrist and all. The way she'd sat in that kitchen and told the actual truth to someone who had no stake in it and no agenda about it, and the way it had felt. Not resolved, not fixed, but true, for the first time in 6 weeks, maybe longer. She did not want to land in San Francisco and lose that again inside the first hour. She was not confident she wouldn't. Priya met her at the arrivals curb in a black car, which was not their usual arrangement, but which told Celeste that Priya had assessed the situation and decided it warranted a departure from usual arrangements. Priya Nair was 41, had a law degree from Georgetown and an MBA from Wharton, and operated at all times with the contained precision of someone who had decided that if you were going to be in rooms where large things happened, you needed to be the most prepared person in the room. She was also, underneath all of that, someone who had worked alongside Celeste for 7 years and did not do things like meet her at arrivals curbs unless she was worried. She looked at Celeste's wrist as she got in the car. Didn't say anything about it, but she looked.
Tell me where we are, Celeste said. Priya told her.
It took most of the drive from SFO to Pacific Heights. 26 minutes of precise, rapid-fire briefing that covered the board composition, the governance committee's audit request, the specific agenda language Hargrove had submitted for Friday's special session, and three things that Celeste hadn't known yet: that Marcus had been in a private dinner with Hargrove and two other board members on Sunday night, 2 days before the airport; that the company's external auditors had received a request for preliminary materials that had not been routed through her office as protocol required, and that Wills had quietly resigned from 2 outside advisory roles in the past week, which was the kind of house-cleaning move that preceded a significant action. Celeste listened without interrupting. She looked out the car window at the city she'd lived in for 9 years, the bay flashing between buildings, the hills doing what they always did, the specific San Francisco light that she'd never completely gotten used to even after nearly a decade. "He moved it up," she said when Priya finished. "Appears so." Something changed. Something made him accelerate. Priya looked at her. The airport incident may have been part of it. If he felt he was losing control of... He panicked, Celeste said. The word surprised her as she said it. Not because it was wrong, but because she hadn't framed it that way before. She'd been so focused on Marcus as the architect of something methodical and controlled that she'd forgotten methodical people could panic too. He panicked and he moved it up, which means the timeline I was working against isn't the timeline anymore. Which means Friday isn't an endgame, it's a pressure point. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. What do we have? Priya handed her a tablet. The document on it was 31 pages. She could tell from the scroll indicator, with a table of contents that Priya had organized into 3 sections: correspondence, voting pattern analysis, and financial documentation. Celeste scrolled slowly through the first section, scanning rather than reading, building the map. How solid is the financial piece? She asked. Solid enough to refer to the SEC. Maybe not solid enough to convict anyone of anything in the near term, but Priya paused, chose her words. Solid enough to create significant instability. If this document is in front of the right people on Friday, the board cannot rationally proceed with a leadership review while there's an open question about whether 2 of its members have been coordinating with a controlling party to manipulate corporate governance. They can proceed, they'll just be doing it in public. Yes. Which is the point. Celeste looked up from the tablet. Who else has seen this? You, me, the associate I had working on the financial piece, but she doesn't know what she was working on. I had her pulling records for what I told her was a routine compliance review. Keep it that way until Friday morning. Understood. Priya looked at her for a moment. What happened in Portland? Celeste looked back at the tablet. I needed somewhere to be. That's not what I asked. I know. She scrolled through a page of board voting records, a column of dates and ayes and nays that told a story if you knew where to look. Someone helped me, she said, a stranger, and it clarified some things. Priya waited. I've been waiting, Celeste said. For 6 weeks I've known what was happening, and I've been adjusting, managing it, trying to find a way through it that didn't require a confrontation. She lowered the tablet. I think I was afraid that if I confronted it directly, I'd lose. And losing this company, it felt like losing yourself, Priya said. Yes. The word came out quiet. And this person, in Portland. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't give me a strategy or a plan. He stayed in the room with the hard part without trying to fix it, and something shifted. Priya was quiet for a moment. Are you going to be okay walking into that building today? Celeste thought about it. Thought about Marcus, who had a key to her apartment and who had called her 6 times between 2 and 3 in the morning, and about the bruise on her wrist, and about the particular architectural shape of what he'd built over 18 months. She thought about the 31 pages on the tablet in her hands. Yes, she said. Are you sure? No, she said. But I'm going in anyway. Priya looked at her for another moment, then she said, I had your locks changed this morning. I hope that's okay. Celeste looked at her. When? While you were flying. I have a friend who does emergency locksmith work. I told him it was my apartment. I have your new keys. Something came up in Celeste's throat that wasn't quite tears, more the specific pressure of being looked after when you hadn't asked and hadn't expected it, the particular emotional weight of that. She pressed it back down. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Just win Friday." "Working on it." The car pulled up to her building. She got out, took the new keys from Priya, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk looking up at the building she'd lived in for 5 years. Pacific Heights. A view of the bay from the living room. A kitchen she'd renovated twice and still didn't feel entirely at home in. She thought, involuntarily, about a kitchen with a cast iron pan and a Trailblazers magnet and a narwhal drawn in pen on a paper napkin. She thought about the water pressure that took 90 seconds to warm up, and for some reason this is what almost got her, the specific, remembered ordinariness of it. She went inside. She didn't sleep much that night, or the next. She worked. She and Priya worked in the conference room of her apartment, which had been designed for this. The long table, the 3 monitors, the secure phone line, the whiteboard that stretched the length of one wall, and which by Wednesday night was covered in what looked from a distance like a conspiracy board, and from up close was a corporate governance timeline with corresponding financial transactions mapped against it. She ate takeout from the Thai place 3 blocks away that she'd eaten at probably 200 times, and which she had no clear memory of on any individual occasion. She slept in 4-hour increments when Priya forced her to, setting alarms on the office phone so the sound of her cell wouldn't trigger the specific anxiety of the past 6 weeks. She changed the ringer on her cell anyway, the one Marcus had called from, so it made no sound at all, just a vibration she could ignore. He called 11 more times over Wednesday and Thursday. She didn't answer any of them. On Wednesday evening, when Priya had gone to collect something from her own office, and Celeste was alone at the whiteboard for the first time all day, she picked up her phone and typed a message to a number she'd entered into her contacts at an airport in Portland under the name D. Cross. She typed, "Board meeting Friday morning. I think we're ready." I think. She stared at what she'd written for a moment. Then she added, "The narwhal is still in my bag." She sent it before she could decide not to. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. The response said, "Scared isn't the same as stopped. Go in." Below that, a second message. "Lily says to remind you about the star." Celeste stood at the whiteboard in her conference room and laughed. Actually laughed. The short, sharp, slightly broken kind that comes when something lands in exactly the right place at exactly the wrong moment. And then she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned back to the board and kept working. Friday came the way important days do. Quietly at first, the morning looking like every other morning, the city outside her windows indifferent to whatever was about to happen inside a conference room on the 34th floor of a building in the financial district. She dressed carefully, not the performative armoring that she'd done for certain meetings in her 20s, when she'd had something to prove and had thought the proof was visible on the outside. Something quieter than that. Dark blazer, clean lines, the watch that had been her mother's, given to her when she'd turned 30 with the note, "You've earned the time." No jewelry from Marcus. She'd taken it all off 3 days ago and put it in a drawer. The meeting was scheduled for 9. She arrived at 8:15, which was early enough to be in the room before anyone else. She wanted the room. She'd learned years ago that whoever already exists in a space when others arrive has a different kind of authority than whoever walks in to find the space already occupied. It was a small thing. Small things mattered. The Sterling Global Boardroom occupied a corner of the 34th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave you the bay on one side and the city on the other. 14 seats around a table made of some dark wood she'd never learned the name of. A credenza with water and coffee. The company logo on the wall behind the head of the table, which was her chair, which she had sat in for 7 years, which she sat in now while the room was empty and the city was bright and clear in the early morning light. She opened the 31-page document on her tablet, read it again, not because she didn't know it. She knew it cold by now, had the timeline memorized, could cite the correspondence dates and vote records from memory, but because she wanted to arrive at the meeting from inside it rather than looking at it from outside. Her phone lit up at 8:47. Priya. They're in the elevator. Hargrove, Wills, and Chen. Marcus is in the lobby. Her stomach did something. She acknowledged it, the way she'd been learning to acknowledge things this week instead of managing them away. And then she set her phone face down on the table and looked at the door. They came in over the next 15 minutes. Board members she'd known for varying lengths of time, some of whom had been with her since the early growth years, some of whom she now understood had been placed with the specific intent of providing a path for what was about to be attempted. She watched them read the room as they entered, saw the slight recalibration that happened in some faces when they found her already there, already present, the agenda document already open in front of her. Hargrove, 62, silver-haired, the particular competent blankness of someone who has spent a long time being on the right side of things and has learned to look like he still is. Wills, 55, who had the quality of someone whose responses always arrived a half-second after they should, as if he was reading from a text that someone else had prepared. Chen, 48, who had been with Sterling Global since year 4, and who sat down and didn't look at Celeste for a moment longer than usual, which she noted. Marcus came in last. She had prepared herself for this, had thought about it specifically, the fact of being in a room with him again after what had happened in Portland. She'd gone over the geometry of it in her head, had tried to think about what she would feel and how to carry it without letting it destabilize her. What she felt watching him walk through the door was simpler and colder than she'd expected. She felt the very precise knowledge of who he was now, stripped of everything she'd overlaid on it for 3 years. He was a man who had decided what he wanted and had methodically worked toward it. And it happened that what he'd decided he wanted included her company and had for a while also conveniently included her. That was the entire truth of it. She'd spent 3 years constructing something more complicated, and now she was done. He looked at her when he entered. A particular look, calibrated to communicate something specific to her and no one else. Control, or the performance of it. A reminder of something. She looked back at him with nothing, which she could see surprised him, and then she looked down at her tablet, and when she looked up again, she had already moved past him. Priya came in 2 minutes before 9 with the company's outside counsel, a woman named Janet Briggs, who was 60, exceptionally good, and who had received a 53-page document from Priya's office at 6:30 that morning that she had apparently spent the intervening 2.5 hours reading, because she came in looking like someone who had just understood what kind of meeting she was actually attending. At 9 o'clock exactly, Celeste said, "Let's start." Hargrove shifted. He'd been intending to open. She could see it in the way he'd positioned himself, the way people position themselves when they've already rehearsed a beginning. "I think we should—" "I'll open," she said. Not aggressive, simply definitive, in the tone of someone who knows exactly where they're sitting. "Since this is my company, my boardroom, and my meeting." Silence. "This session was called as a strategic leadership review," she said. "I'd like to be direct about what that means and what's behind it, because I think we'll all save time if we dispense with the framing and talk about what's actually here." She looked at the room, not at Marcus, at the room, at the 7 board members who were not Hargrove or Wills, the ones whose faces had varying degrees of genuine uncertainty. Those were the people she needed. 3 weeks ago, I became aware of a pattern of coordination that I believe constitutes a material breach of fiduciary duty and potentially securities regulations. Today, I'm going to lay out what I found, and then I'm going to ask all of you to make a decision about what Sterling Global does next. Hargrove said, "Celeste, I think we need to—" "When I'm done," she said. She went through it. 31 pages, condensed. Not all of it. Not the granular documentation, but the shape of it. The correspondence that showed Hargrove and Wills coordinating with Marcus on governance proposals before those proposals were brought to the board. The voting pattern analysis that demonstrated a statistical near impossibility of independent decision-making. The financial documentation that indicated, with what Priya had taken care to characterize as preliminary findings pending full review, that certain board compensation arrangements may have been structured in ways that created undisclosed conflicts of interest. She did not look at Marcus while she spoke. She didn't need to. When she stopped, the room was quiet in a way that boardrooms are quiet when something has shifted. Then Marcus spoke. His voice was the same as always, measured, smooth, the quality of something poured rather than placed. "These are very serious allegations," he said, "and I think we should all take a moment to recognize that what's happening here is—" "I wasn't talking to you, Marcus," she said. He stopped. "You're not a board member. You're the partner, the former partner, of the CEO, and you were invited to this meeting in an advisory capacity that I'm now rescinding." She looked at Janet Briggs, outside counsel. "Janet." Janet opened her folder. "Mr. Hale, as per the company's governance bylaws, advisory attendees may be asked to leave a session at the request of the CEO. I'm going to need you to step out." The room went very still. Marcus looked at Celeste. She could see, and this was not satisfying in any clean way. It was just information. The specific moment when someone who has been very confident in his position understands that the position has changed. It moved across his face in a second, carefully contained, but she'd spent 3 years learning to read him, and she saw it. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You said that to someone else recently," she said. "It didn't turn out to be true then either." He stood. He left. He did it with the composed deliberateness of someone who has not conceded anything, and she watched him go, and then she turned back to the room. "I'd like to continue," she said. The next hour was not clean. She hadn't expected it to be clean. Hargrove pushed back, not defending the substance of what she'd presented, because he was too experienced to defend the indefensible in a room where outside counsel was present, but challenging procedure, questioning the sourcing, suggesting that the appropriate response was to table everything pending an independent review. Wills said very little, which was the behavior of someone who had received legal advice before this meeting and was following it. 2 of the other board members, Okafor and Reyes, who she'd worked with longest, asked questions that were genuinely useful, the kind of questions that helped build the record rather than muddy it. Chen, 48, who had not looked at her when he came in, raised his hand at the 90-minute mark and said, "I'd like to say something." The room waited. "I was approached in December," he said. He said it flatly to the table without looking at Hargrove, "by an intermediary, about whether I'd be willing to support certain governance changes. I didn't report it because I wasn't sure what I was dealing with, and I wasn't—" He stopped. "I wasn't certain enough. I want that on the record." Hargrove's jaw tightened fractionally. "Thank you, David," Celeste said. Her voice was steady. She was very carefully not feeling anything about this right now. That was a practice she'd developed over years, the ability to receive significant information in a live situation and move it to a different shelf for processing later, when the situation was no longer live. "Janet, can you note that for the record?" Janet was already writing. By 11:15 they had voted, 7-2, with Hargrove and Wills the 2, to commission an independent governance investigation, to suspend the special agenda items, and to refer the preliminary financial documentation to the audit committee with a directive to engage outside forensic auditors. Not guilty verdicts, any of it. Not arrests, not the clean ending that would make for a satisfying corporate thriller. What it was, the careful, legally documented beginning of a process that had enough structural integrity to withstand what was coming, because what was coming, the SEC inquiry that Priya had already set in motion, the legal proceedings that would unfold over the next year in the specific grinding way of legal proceedings, needed a foundation that would hold. She had built the foundation. When the meeting ended and people began collecting their things, Okafor stopped beside her chair on his way out. He was 64, had been on the board since year 3, had a quality she'd always respected, the quality of someone who took the long view. He looked at her wrist, which the sleeve of her blazer had ridden up slightly during the meeting. "Are you all right?" he said, low enough that only she heard it. "Getting there," she said. He nodded once and left. Priya found her 20 minutes later in her office down the hall, sitting in the chair behind her desk. Not working, just sitting, the first time she'd just sat in several days. Priya came in, closed the door, set 2 paper cups of coffee on the desk, and sat down in the chair across from her. They sat for a moment. "We didn't win," Celeste said. "Not today." "No," Priya agreed. "We made it so the right people can win. Eventually. That's usually how it works." Celeste wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Her wrist ached under the blazer. She thought about the vote, 7-2, and the specific face Chen had made when he'd said I was approached in December. The look of a person putting down something they'd been carrying for 5 months. She thought about Hargrove's jaw, about Marcus standing up in a boardroom where he'd assumed the architecture was his and finding out it wasn't. She thought about a Navy SEAL who'd crossed 25 feet of airport terminal without being asked. She picked up her phone. Typed. It worked. 7-2. The process starts now. Sent it. This time it took 8 minutes, which probably meant he was working. The response when it came said, "Good. Are you okay?" She thought about this. Thought about what it meant that this was the question. Not what happens next or what does this mean for the company, but the one he kept asking in various forms, the one that she'd kept giving the managed answer to and that he'd kept leaving space around anyway. She typed back, "Getting there. I mean it this time." A pause. Then, "I know you do." Priya was watching her from across the desk with the specific expression of someone who has information and is deciding whether to name it. "What?" Celeste said. "Nothing." Priya drank her coffee. "You're smiling." "I'm not smiling." "You were a second ago." Celeste looked at the phone, put it down. "There's a lot of work still to do." "There is," Priya agreed. "The SEC referral will take months. The forensic audit will take longer. Hargrove and Wills will lawyer up by end of day. Marcus," she stopped. "Marcus will be a problem for a while." "He will," Priya said. "And the company needs—" She stopped again. She'd started a sentence and found, midway through it, that she didn't know how to finish it the way she would have finished it a week ago. The company needs strong leadership. The company needs stability. The company needs me to be exactly who I have been for 11 years. The sentences were true, and they were also, she was aware, slightly empty in a way she didn't have the language for yet. "What does the company need?" Priya asked. Celeste looked at her, looked at the window, the bay, the light, the familiar city she'd built something in. She thought about 12,000 people. She thought about the 6 people who were still with her from year 1, from the rented server room in Palo Alto. She thought about what she'd said to Priya in the car from the airport. It felt like losing myself. She thought, maybe that was the question. Maybe what she needed to figure out was whether who she had become inside this company was still who she was. Whether she'd been fighting so hard to keep the building that she'd stopped asking whether she still wanted to live in it. She didn't say any of this to Priya. It wasn't ready to be said yet. She picked up her coffee. "The company needs a few days," she said, "and then we'll figure out what it needs." Priya looked at her for a moment, nodded, slowly, the nod of someone who heard the answer that was given, and also the one underneath it. Outside the window, the bay caught the midday light and threw it back. San Francisco went on doing what San Francisco did, indifferent and beautiful, indifferent to what had just happened on a 34th floor, indifferent to the specific shape of what a person carries out of a room when they've done the hard thing and survived it, and are not yet sure what they survived it into. In the front pocket of her bag, folded carefully, a napkin narwhal waited. The weeks after the board meeting had the particular quality of a storm that had passed but left everything slightly rearranged. The independent governance investigation was formally commissioned on the Monday following the Friday session. The forensic audit team, 6 people from an outside firm with no prior relationship to Sterling Global, which had been Priya's insistence and which Celeste was grateful for, arrived on Wednesday and set up in a conference room on the 22nd floor that was sealed off from general access. Hargrove submitted his resignation from the board 11 days after the meeting, citing personal reasons in a letter so carefully worded that it said absolutely nothing while appearing to say something. Wills held on for another week, then followed. Their lawyers were talking to the company's lawyers, and those conversations had the slow, grinding quality of things that were going to take a long time and cost everyone involved more than they'd budgeted for. Marcus's name appeared in a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission 3 weeks after the board meeting. Priya called Celeste when it happened. It was 7 in the morning. Celeste was still in the apartment she now navigated differently. The locks changed. The specific spatial memory of him in it slowly being overwritten by the simple daily fact of him not being there. She took the call standing in the kitchen, looking at the bay. "It's public now," Priya said. "I know. The press will have it by noon." "I know." She set down her coffee. "How do you feel?" A pause. Priya was not someone who typically answered questions about her feelings, particularly not before 8 in the morning. "I feel like we did the right thing," she said. "I feel like it's going to be a difficult several months." "Both of those are true," Celeste said. The press did have it by noon. By 3 in the afternoon, it was on the financial pages and the tech blogs and 2 cable news channels.
with the particular framing that the press tends to apply to stories involving a female CEO and a male partner, and accusations of corporate manipulation. A framing that was not wrong exactly, but that reduced everything to dimensions that fit a certain template and left out the specific texture of what it had actually been. She didn't read most of it. Diana, her assistant, monitored the coverage and sent her a daily digest that she read once and then closed. What she did read, twice, was a longer piece in a business journal, the kind of publication that moves slowly enough to actually report rather than react, which had somehow obtained a comment from David Chen and which described, with reasonable accuracy, the pattern of governance manipulation that the investigation was examining. She didn't know how they'd gotten to Chen. She suspected he'd called them. She found she was glad someone had. Through all of it, the investigation, the filings, the coverage, the legal back and forth, the endless meetings with outside counsel about what she could say and when she could say it, she kept thinking about a question she'd started but hadn't finished in Priya's office the afternoon of the board meeting. What does the company need? She'd said a few days, and then those days had turned into the operational management of a crisis, and she'd let the question sit because there was always something more immediate pressing in on it, which was, she was aware, what had gotten her into the situation with Marcus in the first place, the ability of urgent things to crowd out important ones. She talked to Damon on the phone twice in the first week after the board meeting. Not long calls, 20 minutes each. The kind of calls where the content matters less than the texture of them, where you're not solving a problem but making sure a person is still there. He told her about a particularly difficult shift, a teenager who'd come in after a cycling accident, serious but not catastrophic, and the specific focus required for those cases where the margin between those two outcomes is very thin. She told him about the SEC filing and what it meant. He listened in the way she'd come to recognize as his particular mode, genuinely, fully, without using the silence to load the next thing he was going to say. "Are you sleeping?" he asked on the second call. "Some." "That's the same answer you gave me about your wrist." "The wrist is better." Celeste. She was sitting on her couch, the Pacific Heights couch, the good one, the one she'd picked because it was beautiful rather than comfortable, and which she now found slightly ironic. "I'm sleeping 4 or 5 hours," she said. "There's a lot moving." "There's always going to be a lot moving." "I know, it's just—" She stopped. "This particular convergence of a lot moving. It'll settle." "Okay." He didn't push it, which was either the right call or an infuriating one, she couldn't always tell which. "Lily wants to know if you still have the narwhal." "Tell Lily I carry it everywhere." A pause. "She'll be insufferably pleased about that." "She should be. It worked." She heard something in the background, the specific ambient noise of his apartment that she'd only been in once, but that she'd apparently encoded with some precision because she recognized the refrigerator hum. "How is she?" Celeste asked. "Good. She's got a science fair project now. Volcanoes, which we've been through volcanoes, but apparently she has new information." "Of course she does." "She asked about you the other day, wanted to know if the board meeting went okay." Celeste was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell her?" "I said you won the important part." She held that. "Did I?" "You showed up ready, and you did the work," he said. "That's the part you're responsible for. What the lawyers and the SEC do with it, that's not yours to carry." "I know." She did know. She knew it intellectually, in the part of her brain that was good at this kind of compartmentalization. The other parts were still working on it. "Come up sometime," he said. "When the immediate pressure lets off, Lily keeps referencing you in conversations where you're not relevant, which is her way of saying she'd like you to come back." "What does she say?" "Last week she told her teacher that her dad's friend Celeste knows that narwhals are related to belugas, as a credential, for an argument she was having about marine biology." Celeste laughed. "The real kind, the one that didn't require any preparation. I'm honored to be cited." "You should be." She doesn't cite just anyone. She went to Portland 5 weeks after the board meeting, not for any strategic reason. The investigation was in its methodical middle phase. The legal proceedings were moving the way legal proceedings move. Priya had things in hand, and Celeste had found herself on a Tuesday afternoon looking at her calendar and seeing an open Thursday and Friday that she could fill
and had been filling for 11 years, and very suddenly didn't want to fill. She booked the flight before she told Damon she was coming, which in retrospect was probably backwards. But she'd learned that if she left decisions like this in the planning stage too long, they accumulated enough reasons against them to stop happening. She texted him from the gate. "I'm on the noon flight to Portland. Tell me if that's okay, and I'll explain later." He texted back 4 minutes later. "It's okay. We'll be at the apartment." She arrived at 2:30. He buzzed her up and she climbed the 3 flights, the stairs that smelled like garlic, and someone else's comfortable life. And the door was open when she got to it. Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework, or doing something that had the structural features of homework, while also involving a surprising amount of colored pencil use. She looked up when Celeste walked in. "You came back," she said. Not surprised exactly, more like the specific satisfaction of a prediction confirmed.
"I came back," Celeste said. "Are you staying for dinner? If that's okay." "Dad made chili," Lily said. "He makes it too spicy, but then he puts cheese on it, so it's okay." "I make it exactly the right amount of spicy," Damon said, from where he was standing in the kitchen doorway. And Celeste looked at him, and the thing that happened was simple and uncomplicated in a way that very few things in her life were right now. She was just glad to be there.
In the doorway of this apartment that stuck at the upper left corner and smelled like other people's dinners and had a refrigerator with a narwhal drawing on it, she was just glad. "Thank you for not making me explain over text," she said. "You don't have to explain at all," he said. "You can just show up." She wasn't sure when she'd last been told that. She thought about it later, sitting at his kitchen table eating chili that was in fact slightly too spicy and completely good, while Lily explained her volcano project with the passionate specificity of someone who had discovered that the inside of the Earth was significantly more interesting than people generally discussed. And she thought, when was the last time someone told me I could just show up? She couldn't find a clear answer. She stayed through Friday. She slept on the couch again, which was comfortable again in the same way, and she woke up both mornings to the sound of the coffee grinder and the refrigerator hum, and Lily somewhere in the apartment doing whatever Lily did at 6 in the morning, which appeared to involve both quiet singing and some form of light construction. She sat at his kitchen table and did work. There was always work. There would probably always be work. She wasn't operating under the illusion that the volume was going to decrease significantly, but she did it differently than she'd been doing it in San Francisco. She took breaks. She ate breakfast that someone else made. She had conversations that were not about the company or the investigation or the legal proceedings. On Thursday evening, she and Damon sat on his small balcony, a concrete rectangle that held 2 chairs and a pot of something that had been a plant and was now optimistic sticks. While Lily was on a video call with her friend Maya about a project they were apparently co-developing that involved either a business or a social movement, Celeste hadn't been able to follow the full scope of it. The city was doing the things cities do at dusk, the light going amber and the traffic sounds becoming the ambient rather than the foreground. "I've been thinking about leaving," she said. He looked at her. "The company," she said. "Leaving Sterling Global." He didn't say anything. He let the statement exist without immediately responding to it, which was what he did, which she had come to appreciate even when it was slightly maddening. "I started it," she said, 11 years ago. "I know every person in that building by name, or I used to. Once you get past about 800 people, the names become harder, but I know the department heads, the team leads. I know the 6 people who've been there since the beginning. I know what we set out to build." She looked at the optimistic sticks. "And I don't know if it's still that. I don't know if what I saved on Friday is the thing I built or something else that has the same name." "What's the difference?" he asked. She thought about how to answer this. "The company I built was supposed to solve problems, real ones, not just the problem of quarterly returns. We built infrastructure tools for hospitals in underserved markets. We did. That was the first thing, the original thing. And then somewhere in the growth phase, it became about the growth, and the problem solving became, it didn't go away, but it became the marketing version of itself rather than the actual version." She paused. "I let that happen. I was so focused on the scale of it, the momentum, and Marcus was very good at telling me that the mission and the growth were the same thing, that you couldn't do the former without the latter, and She stopped. "You believed him," Damon said. "I wanted to believe him," she said. There's a difference. He looked at her. What would you do if you left? She'd been sitting with this question for 3 weeks, ever since she'd failed to finish the sentence in Priya's office. She'd turned it over, looked at it from different angles, taken it apart, and put it back together. There's a gap in medical technology, she said. In the middle market, not the big hospital systems that can afford enterprise solutions, and not the consumer health tech that's everywhere, but the mid-tier providers, community clinics, rural hospitals, the places that need real infrastructure and can't afford what the market offers. She looked at him. I know that space because Sterling Global was supposed to be serving it. I know exactly where the gap is. He was quiet for a moment. Is that what you want to do, or what you think you should do? The question landed somewhere specific. She sat with it. Both, she said finally. I think both things can be true. They can, he said. I was asking which was leading. She looked at him. This man who had been a Navy SEAL and was now a trauma medic in a hospital in Portland and lived in a 3-flight walk-up with optimistic sticks on the balcony and a daughter who cited marine biology credentials in arguments, and who somehow asked the questions that arrived in exactly the right place every time. The want, she said. I think the want is leading. I think I miss building something for a reason I actually believe in. He nodded slowly. Not the performance of agreement, the real thing. Are you going to think I'm an idiot? She said. Leaving a company I spent 11 years building. No. Some people will. Some people thought I was an idiot for leaving contract work to come back to Portland and take a hospital job for a third of the pay. She looked at him. Were they wrong? He glanced back through the glass door toward the sound of Lily's voice on the phone. Yeah, he said. They were wrong. The next morning, Friday, her last day before flying back, Lily asked Celeste if she wanted to see the volcano project, which was currently set up on the dining table in a configuration that occupied approximately 40% of its surface area. Celeste said yes, and spent 35 minutes receiving a detailed scientific briefing on subduction zones and magma composition and the specific factors that had caused the eruption of a volcano in Iceland in 1783 that Lily had apparently become fixated on because of its effect on global weather patterns. Did you know it changed the weather in America? Lily said. Like the winter after was one of the worst ever. And it was because of a volcano in Iceland. I didn't know that, Celeste said. It's called a climate impact, Lily said. One thing that happens far away can change everything somewhere completely different. Celeste looked at her. Yes, she said. That's true. Lily seemed satisfied with this response and returned to her exhibit, which featured a baking soda and vinegar volcano of classic construction alongside what appeared to be a genuinely impressive hand-drawn diagram of tectonic plates. Celeste watched her work and thought about climate impacts, about things that happen far away, about a Tuesday in an airport when something had shifted in a direction she hadn't planned and hadn't predicted, and which had one way or another changed the weather. She flew back to San Francisco on Friday afternoon. At the gate, waiting to board, she called Priya. I need to set up a meeting next week, she said, with the full leadership team. What kind of meeting? A transition meeting. She watched the gate agent begin the boarding process. I'm going to recommend the board begin a search for a new CEO. I'll stay through the transition, 6 months, maybe 9, however long it takes to do it right. But I'm going to recommend they start looking. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of surprise exactly. More the silence of someone absorbing news they had suspected was coming. Are you sure? Priya said. Yes. The timing, I know the timing is complicated. The investigation is still running. The press will have opinions. Marcus's people will try to use it as a narrative about instability. She paused. I've been making decisions based on how they'll be used against me for a long time. I'd like to stop doing that. Another silence. Then Priya said, What are you going to do? Build something smaller, she said. Something I can believe in the actual version of, not the marketing version. Medical technology? Priya's voice had shifted, slightly, barely detectably, the shift of someone who has been waiting to see what form the thing they suspected was taking. How did you... You've mentioned the mid-market gap 4 times in the past 3 years, Priya said, in passing.
like a door you kept walking by and not opening. Celeste stood at the window, the tarmac, the planes, the indifferent machinery of transit. "I need a legal chief," she said, "for a startup, which means I can't pay you what you make now. Not for a while." A very long pause. "Celeste," Priya said, do you think I stayed at Sterling Global for the salary?" She felt something rise in her chest and pressed it back, the specific practice of receiving care without deflecting it, which she was still working on. "I'll draw up a real offer," she said. "You don't have to. I want to do it right." "Fine," Priya said. "Do it right." A beat. The 6 people from the beginning, Myers and Tanaka especially, they've been restless. I'm not saying anything. I know, Celeste said. "I've noticed. I'm just saying that when you open a door, you might be surprised who's already standing near it." She boarded the plane. She sat by the window again, which was becoming a habit she hadn't had before Portland. As the plane taxied, she took out her phone and texted Damon. "On my way back. I made a decision." The response came before they'd reached the runway. "About the company?" "Yes." "Good decision or hard decision?" She thought about this. "Both," she typed. "I think both things can be true." A minute passed. Then, "They can. Which one is leading?" She looked out the window at the taxiway, at the planes lined up in the pale afternoon light, each one going somewhere specific, each carrying people with their specific reasons and their specific destinations. "The good one," she typed. The plane lifted. Below her, San Francisco arranged itself into the familiar aerial pattern. The bay, the bridges, the geometry of a city she'd built something in and would now build something different in, or maybe somewhere else. Maybe she didn't need to decide that yet. She pressed her back against the seat and let the plane do what planes do. She thought about what came next. Not the whole picture, the next thing. The next thing was a conversation with her board, which she'd have Monday morning. After that was the transition plan. After that was a piece of paper with a name on it. She'd been thinking about names for 3 weeks, in the margins of other things, in the way you do when you're not ready to start something, but the something has already started in you. After that was a phone call to Myers, who'd been with her since the beginning, and who had a background in product development and a tendency to get restless when things stopped being built and started being managed. After that was a conversation she needed to have with herself about where she wanted to be, geographically, structurally, personally, that she'd been postponing with the reasonable excuse of crisis, and that she was now running out of excuses to postpone. She looked at the seat pocket in front of her because she had a habit of putting her bag there. In the front pocket of the bag, folded along its original crease, the napkin narwhal. She looked at it for a moment, Lily's precise pen lines, the small star, the block letters slightly uneven on the bottom. "Good luck, you got this." She had not thrown it away. She didn't think she was going to. The flight home was 47 minutes, same as the flight there, same duration, entirely different shape. She spent the first 20 working. She spent the last 20 looking out the window and thinking about a small apartment in northeast Portland where the door stuck at the upper left corner and the water took 90 seconds to warm up and the coffee was made in a French press, and there was a child who knew more about volcanoes than most adults, and who had handed her a piece of paper that had turned out to be more useful than most of the strategic advice she'd received in the past 11 years. She thought about what Damon had said, sitting on the balcony with the optimistic sticks. You can just show up. She was, she thought, going to have to think carefully about what that meant. About what showing up looked like when it wasn't a visit or a crisis or a thing she was doing between other things. About whether she knew how to exist in the ordinary way that that apartment existed. The garlic smell and the narwhal magnet and the slightly too spicy chili and the easy back and forth of two people who had each other's rhythms memorized. She wasn't sure she knew how. She'd been in motion for 11 years. The motion had been the thing, had been what she was good at, what she was built for, what she'd organized her entire adult life around. Stepping out of the motion was going to require a different kind of competence, one she didn't have the training for and couldn't credential herself into. But she'd walked into a board meeting 2 weeks ago not knowing if it would hold, and it had held. She'd told the truth in a room full of people who were banking on her not telling it, and the room had changed. She'd called a locksmith at 7 a.m. because she needed the locks changed, and she hadn't been able to make herself call one for 3 weeks,
And then suddenly she could, because something had shifted in the night on a stranger's couch, and the shifted thing had held. Things could shift. She had proof. The plane landed. She collected her bag from the overhead bin, moved with the unhurried flow of deplaned passengers through the terminal, and stood on the arrivals curb for a moment before calling her car. The evening air was cool and smelled like the bay, the specific San Francisco smell she'd never entirely learned to take for granted. Her phone buzzed. A text from a Portland number. Lily wants to know if you decided on a name yet. For the new company. She has suggestions. Celeste looked at this, looked at the bay-scented air, felt something in her chest that was warm and uncomplicated, and that she was going to need to stop being surprised by eventually. Tell her I'm taking suggestions, she typed back. I'll call tomorrow. She put her phone in her pocket and looked at the city. It was time to build something new. Lily's suggestions for the company name arrived via text message the following afternoon, relayed by Damon with the fidelity of someone transcribing official correspondence. The list read, Narwhal Tech, StarMed, Beluga Care, because narwhals are related to belugas, and that's interesting. Ocean Health, she says the ocean fixes things. Just Celeste, she thinks your name is good enough. Celeste was sitting in her conference room at the time, surrounded by draft documents for the transition announcement, and she read the list twice and felt the specific warmth of it cut through the ambient weight of everything else on the table. She texted back, Tell her I'm seriously considering Beluga Care. Also tell her the ocean health angle is not wrong. Damon's response, She's now explaining to me why Beluga Care is scientifically accurate. This is going to be a long evening. She put the phone down and looked at the draft announcement in front of her and thought, This is the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the safe thing, but right in the specific way that decisions are right when they come from the part of you that hasn't been compromised by the accumulation of what other people needed you to be. The announcement went out on a Monday morning, 8 weeks after the board meeting. Celeste Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Global Technologies, notifying the board of her intent to step down following a structured transition period estimated at 6 to 9 months. The statement was clear, professional, and contained no language that could be read as retreat or defeat, because it wasn't. It was the honest thing. She was leaving to build something else. She said so plainly. The press had opinions, as predicted. Several financial commentators interpreted it as an exit under pressure, which was a convenient narrative that required ignoring most of the available evidence, but which required less effort than the actual story. Two of the business publications that had covered the governance investigation accurately reported the transition in the same register. The context of what she'd built, and what she'd uncovered, and what she was choosing next. One profile, a longer piece that a journalist had been researching for 3 weeks, and which ran the same day as the announcement, described her decision as the rarest thing in Silicon Valley. A founder who knows when the thing she built has become someone else's project and has the clarity to say so. She read that one twice, put it away, got back to work. The transition took 7 months, not 6, because doing it right took the time it took, and she wasn't willing to do it in a way that left 12,000 people without adequate leadership continuity. She stayed fully engaged, board meetings, executive briefings, the ongoing investigation which proceeded through its phases with the grinding patience of due process. Marcus's legal situation resolved the way these things resolve. Not with the dramatic swiftness of a verdict, but with the slow pressure of mounting documentation, of plea agreements that cascaded, of Hargrove's lawyers eventually deciding that cooperation served their client better than solidarity. He was charged on 3 counts. He maintained his composure in the press photographs, which she expected. He looked in those photographs like a man who was still calculating. She hoped for his sake as much as anyone's that he eventually ran out of angles. She didn't spend much time hoping it. Her new company incorporated in February. She registered it in Oregon, which was a decision that several people questioned and that she declined to explain fully. The name was not Beluga Care, though she'd seriously considered it, long enough to tell Lily she'd seriously considered it, which had produced a reaction of considerable satisfaction, but something cleaner and more direct: Bridgeway Medical Systems. The gap she was building toward was real and documented, and she'd been thinking about how to fill it for 3 years while telling herself she was too busy. It turned out she wasn't too busy. She'd been afraid. Priya joined as chief legal officer with an equity stake in lieu of her sterling global salary and the particular energy of someone who has been waiting for a door to open. Myers. Aaron. Myers, who's 38, who had been with Celeste since the original server room in Palo Alto, and who had spent the past 4 years growing visibly restless inside Sterling Global's scale, came on as head of product development, a title that was arguably too small for what he'd be doing, but which he'd accepted with the straightforward relief of a person returning to work he actually believed in. Tanaka, who built the infrastructure systems that Sterling Global's first hospital clients had run on, and who had once told Celeste in a conference room that she thought they'd lost the thread somewhere, and then apologized for saying it, came on as CTO and did not apologize for anything. 6 people in a rented office space in the Pearl District of Portland. Not a server room this time. They'd arrived slightly past that stage, but close enough in spirit. The office smelled like fresh paint and someone's coffee and the particular possibility of things that haven't failed yet. She signed the lease on an apartment 4 blocks away in March. Not Pacific Heights. Not a view of the bay. A 3rd-floor apartment in a building that was slightly newer than Damon's and slightly better lit, and had a kitchen that she was going to actually learn to cook in, or try to, which was the kind of project she now had the interior space to contemplate. She did not move to Portland because of Damon. This was something she was clear about with herself, with Priya, and eventually with Damon himself, when the conversation became one they needed to have. She moved because the company was there, because she'd chosen the city deliberately, because Bridgeway's first target market was the Pacific Northwest, and the data cluster that supported that decision had nothing to do with anyone's personal life. These things were true. They were also not the whole truth, and she was done with partial truths. The whole truth was that over 7 months of transition work and company building, through 40-hour weeks and phone calls that kept getting longer, and a standing Sunday morning video call that had started as a Bridgeway update because she'd wanted Damon's read on something operational and had gradually become something that bore no resemblance to an operational update. She had understood something that probably would have been obvious to someone observing from outside. She was falling in love with someone she'd met in an airport, and it was the least complicated thing that had happened to her in years, which was strange, because it should have been complicated, and it wasn't. She told him in April. Not strategically. Not with preparation. They were sitting in his kitchen. Her kitchen now was 4 blocks away, but she was in his kitchen because that's where she was most evenings, a fact that had evolved without formal discussion over the preceding 6 weeks, in the way that things evolve when 2 people stop negotiating the natural gravity between them. Lily was at a sleepover at Maya's, which was a regular Thursday night arrangement that Celeste had become familiar with, the way you become familiar with the rhythms of a household when you're in it often enough. She'd brought dinner, Thai from a place she'd found 2 blocks from her apartment that had a yellow curry she'd been eating with embarrassing regularity. And they'd eaten at the kitchen table with the narwhal magnet on the refrigerator and the cast iron pan on the stove, and she'd been telling him about a meeting with a potential hospital partner in Bend, and midway through a sentence she'd stopped. He looked at her. "What?" She set her fork down, looked at the table for a second. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to let me finish it before you respond." He leaned back slightly, waiting. "I moved here for the company," she said. "That's true, and I need it to stay true because I can't be someone who made a business decision based on a person. I'm not built that way, and I don't think you'd want me to be." She looked up at him. "But I also moved here because of you and Lily. Because standing in your kitchen 11 months ago and telling the truth to a complete stranger was the most useful thing that happened to me in a decade, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about what that means." She paused. "I'm in love with you. I don't need you to say it back. I just needed you to know that I know it, and that I'm saying it on purpose." He was quiet for a moment, just long enough that she felt the specific vulnerability of having said the real thing and waiting to see what the air did with it. "I'm not going to say it back," he said. She nodded, started to reach for her fork. "I'm going to say it first," he said. "I've been in love with you since approximately the 2nd morning. When you sat at my kitchen table and told me the actual thing instead of the version of the actual thing, and I realized I'd never met anyone who could do that without it costing them something visible." He looked at her with the steady directness that she'd cataloged now across nearly a year. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want it to be the reason you were here. I needed it to not be the reason. She looked at him. It's not the only reason. I know. He picked up his fork. Beluga Care is in Portland, too. Bridgeway, she said. I know what it's called. She threw a piece of bread at him. He caught it, which was exactly the kind of thing she should have predicted. And she laughed, and the kitchen held it the way that kitchen held everything, simply, without ceremony, in the warm and functional way of a place where real things happened. Lily came home from Maya's the following Friday afternoon and found Celeste at the kitchen table working on her laptop, which was a thing that had been true with increasing regularity, and which Lily received with the composure of someone who had been factoring this development into her projections for several months. Are you staying for dinner? She asked, dropping her backpack on its hook with the practiced ease of a routine. If that's okay, Celeste said, which was what she always said. It's okay, Lily said, which was what she always said. She went to get a snack from the refrigerator, paused, looked at Celeste from across the kitchen. Are you going to live here? Celeste looked up from the laptop. I have an apartment 4 blocks away. I know, Lily said, but you're here a lot. I am. Maya's mom says when someone's somewhere a lot, it means they want to be there. Maya's mom is perceptive. Lily considered this. She appeared to be running some internal calculation, her expression the particular focused quality it got when she was taking something seriously. My dad's happier, she said, since you've been around more. He laughs more. Celeste set the laptop down carefully. Does that bother you? No, Lily said, with the certainty of someone who has given this prior consideration. I like it. I just wanted you to know I noticed. She pulled an apple from the refrigerator. Because sometimes adults don't think kids notice things. I know, Celeste said. You notice everything. I notice a lot of things, Lily agreed with the modest accuracy of someone who is not bragging, but also not going to dispute the assessment. She bit into the apple. Beluga Care is a better name than Bridgeway, she said, and took the apple to her room. Damon came home from his shift at 6:50. He came in the way he came in from the long shifts. A particular quality of quietness. Not bad, just the decompression process of someone moving between very different kinds of intensity. He dropped his bag by the door, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and stood for a moment looking at what was on the stove, which was Celeste making a reasonable attempt at the pasta dish she'd eaten on her first night in this apartment, the one she'd asked him to teach her 6 weeks ago, and which she was now making with moderate competence and heavy garlic. You cooked, he said. Attempted. Smells good. Don't raise expectations. She stirred it. I burned the first batch of garlic. I started over. He stood beside her and looked in the pan. Looks fine. Lily thinks Beluga Care is a better name than Bridgeway, she said. Lily's not wrong. He got a glass of water, leaned against the counter. How was the Ben call? Good. They want a demonstration of the platform in May. If that goes the way I think it'll go, we have our first client. That's significant. It is. She turned the heat down. Priya thinks we can have 3 clients by end of year if the Ben demonstration delivers. Myers has the product in a state that I think will actually show well, which, the first time I said that about a version of this product, I cried a little, which I'm not going to confirm or deny. I'll neither confirm nor deny having heard that, he said. She looked at him. He was watching her with the expression she knew best by now. Not an expression she could have described to someone who asked, because it didn't have a category name, but one she recognized the way you recognize the sound of a specific person's footsteps in a hallway. Present. Warm. Hers. In the uncomplicated way that things are yours when they come without conditions. Lily told me you've been laughing more, she said. He was quiet for a beat. She said that? She notices things. I know. He looked at his water glass. She's right. I have been. He looked back up. You know what's different? I come home and there's someone who's in the middle of their own hard thing, who isn't waiting for me to fix anything, who's just here doing their own work and existing in the same space. He paused. I didn't know how much I needed that until it was there. She thought about this, about the shape of what he'd just described. 2 people in the same space, doing their own work, not fixing each other, just present. About how she'd spent 11 years in motion, and the motion had been the thing, and the motion had also been, in part, a way of not having to exist in the stillness with another person, not having to be seen in the ordinary way of being seen rather than the professional way, about how she'd come to Portland for a company and found that the company was genuinely the right decision, and also that the right decision had required her to stop moving long enough to understand what she actually wanted to move toward. She thought, this is not a perfect story. This is a story about a woman who let someone manipulate her for 18 months, who spent 6 weeks waiting when she should have been moving, who needed a stranger in an airport to remind her that scared and stopped were not the same thing. This is a story about a man who came home from war and built a life that was small and deliberate and sometimes lonely and didn't know how to say so. This is a story about an 8-year-old who draws narwhals on napkins and hands them to people like talismans and is usually right about who needs one. This is not a perfect story. It is the only kind worth telling. "Dinner's ready," she said. Lily materialized from the hallway with the timing of a person who has been informally monitoring the kitchen status from a distance. They ate together at the table where Celeste had first told the actual truth, and the garlic pasta was imperfect and good, and Lily explained at some length that her volcano project had received the highest grade in the class, a fact she presented not with boasting, but with the deep satisfaction of a person who had done the work and received the appropriate result. "The teacher said the climate impact section was the most sophisticated," Lily said. "I think that's because I talked to you about it." "You did all the research yourself," Celeste said. "I know. But you understood it when I explained it. Some people's eyes go away when I explain things. Yours didn't." Damon looked at his plate with the expression of a man who is not going to comment on his daughter saying something genuinely moving in the middle of a weeknight dinner about pasta. "My eyes are not going anywhere," Celeste said. Lily nodded, satisfied. She ate her pasta. Can we get a fish?" she asked, to no one in particular. "No," Damon said. "A small fish." "Still no." "It wouldn't be any work. Fish are low maintenance." "Fish are not low maintenance." "I read that they are." "Where did you read that?" Lily considered. "I might have made that up," she said. "But I could do the research." "Do the research," Damon said. "Present me with evidence. I will consider a fish." Lily looked at Celeste. "He's going to consider a fish," she said, with the tone of someone who has already won and is merely allowing the paperwork to catch up. The evening went the way evenings went in this apartment. Dishes, the particular homework negotiation that was different every night in its specific content and identical in its structure. Lily at the table with colored pencils and a book, and the quiet industry of a child who has been given the impression that learning is a thing you do because it's interesting rather than because you have to, which was Damon's greatest parenting achievement and one he was too practical to take much credit for. Celeste sat on the couch with her laptop and did an hour of work and did not find it strange to be doing it here, in someone else's space, in a space that had been someone else's and was becoming hers in the incremental way of things that happen through accumulation rather than decision. At 9 o'clock, Lily said goodnight with the resigned efficiency of someone who has learned that the argument about bedtime is not one she wins, and who has taken the strategic position of surrendering it with grace to preserve energy for more winnable battles. She hugged Damon. She hugged Celeste, which had started happening around month 2, tentatively at first and then with the natural ease of a routine, a quick, firm hug, the kind that doesn't ask for anything, that just lands and releases. Celeste held it each time longer than she meant to. The apartment was quiet after, the particular quiet of a place after a child goes to sleep. A different quality of quiet than empty, warmer, the quiet of something held rather than something absent. Damon sat beside her on the couch, not close in the performing closeness of a romantic scene, just on the same couch, in the way they'd been on the same couch for months, the distance between them comfortable and easy. "I've been thinking," he said. "About the fish?" "About the fish later." He looked at the middle distance, the particular look he got when he was about to say the real thing. "About what we're doing, what this is." "Okay," she said. She put the laptop aside. I don't have a lot of practice with what comes after the hard part," he said. "I've been good at the hard part. 6 years of hard parts, 4 years of different hard parts, 2 years of the particular hard part of doing this." He gestured, encompassing the apartment, Lily's room down the hall, the narwhal on the refrigerator. "On my own.
And I'm good at hard things. I know how to be in the middle of something difficult and stay functional. I know, she said.
What I don't know is how to be in the good thing, he said, when it's there. When the hard part is done and what's left is just the life. I get uncomfortable with it. I start looking for the thing that's wrong. She looked at him. The lamp on the table behind him, and the window with the city outside, and the man she loved telling her an imperfect truth without dressing it up. I know, she said again. Is that... He stopped. Is that something you can work with? I spent 11 years building something because staying in motion felt safer than standing still, she said. I have some familiarity with the pattern. He looked at her. That's either a yes or the most diplomatic non-answer I've ever heard. It's a yes, she said. It's both of us knowing this about ourselves and saying it out loud rather than letting it be the thing that goes wrong later without us seeing it coming. Yeah, he said. That's what I was trying to do. I know. She looked at him. Damon. Yeah. I'm not going anywhere. He was quiet. She could see him receiving this, not the deflection of it, not the immediate reassuring response, just actually receiving it, the way he'd taught her to receive things, by sitting in the space around them. Okay, he said, finally, low and real. Also, I'm going to need you to not be weird about the company, she said. I'm not weird about the company. You made a face last week when I mentioned the Bend client. I made a face because you described their current IT infrastructure and it sounded dangerous. That's literally why we're going there. I know, I'm just saying, the face was about the IT infrastructure. Okay, she said. I'm very supportive of the company, he said. I think Bridgeway is a better name than Beluga Care. Lily will be devastated to hear that. Lily's asleep. She'll find out. She always does, he said, and he was smiling now, the real smile that she'd cataloged alongside the expression she couldn't name. Both of them hers. Both of them things she intended to keep seeing for a long time. She reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically, just took it, and he let her, and they sat in the quiet apartment while Portland did what Portland did outside the window. The ordinary city traffic, someone's music from 2 floors below, the refrigerator hum. The months that followed were imperfect in all the specific ways that real things are imperfect. The Bend demonstration in May went well enough that the hospital's technology director had additional questions and brought in 3 more people for a follow-up, which was the kind of well that takes 2 more months to become a signed contract, but which has its own particular quality of promise. Celeste drove to Bend twice. She stayed in a Marriott near the hospital and ate room service and worked late and called Damon from the hotel room, and the calls were the same length as they'd been when she was in San Francisco. The same comfortable duration of 2 people who've stopped performing updates for each other and are just talking. The SEC investigation reached its first major resolution in June. Marcus Hale entered a plea agreement that included substantial financial penalties and a 5-year bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. She heard about it from Priya, who called at 7 in the morning, which was becoming their operating hour. She felt something when she heard it, not satisfaction, not the clean relief she'd expected, something more complicated. The particular feeling of a thing that had consumed 2 years of her life reaching its resolution, which was smaller than the thing itself had been, the way resolutions usually are. Are you okay? Priya asked. Yes, she said. This time she meant it. The Bend contract signed in August. 3 additional community health systems in the Pacific Northwest expressed interest by September, which was 2 ahead of Priya's end-of-year projection and which meant Myers was working hours that Celeste monitored with the specific concern of someone who had run a growing company before and knew what happened to the people who carried it in its early stages. You need to hire 2 more engineers, she told him, in September. I know, he said. I have a list. Don't let the list sit. You sound like Priya. Priya's right about most things. I know that too. He looked at her across the conference table that had replaced the one he'd known at Sterling Global. Smaller, older, a scratch across one end from the move. This is going well, he said, with the tentative quality of someone who has been surprised by good things before and has learned not to state them too confidently. It is, she said, like the early days, but we know more, she said. Yeah, he nodded slowly.
We know more. She moved most of her things out of the Pacific Heights apartment in October. She kept it on a reduced lease for another 3 months because she wasn't someone who made irreversible logistical decisions without a runway, and because there was still board business in San Francisco that occasionally required her physical presence. But she didn't think of it as home anymore, which it had never quite been, and she thought of the Portland apartment as home in the way that had surprised her. Genuinely, immediately, the way something is home because of what happens inside it, rather than what it looks like from the outside. She kept a drawer at Damon's apartment. This was not discussed. It evolved. First one thing left behind, then a second, then the drawer was simply where things were, and neither of them named it, and the not naming of it was its own kind of language. Lily got a fish in November. A single bed of fish in a small tank that she'd researched with the thoroughness of a doctoral candidate and presented to Damon with a 12-point document covering care requirements, life expectancy, and what she described as the fish's psychological needs. Damon had read the document, verified 2 of the 12 points independently, and approved the fish on the grounds that the research had been conducted in good faith. The fish was named Vesuvius. Celeste had been present for the naming. She'd been present for a lot of things by November. The school's fall open house, where she'd sat next to Damon in small plastic chairs and listened to Lily's teacher describe her as unusually engaged with scientific topics and very willing to correct other students when they're factually imprecise, which had made Damon say that's accurate under his breath with a resignation that was entirely fond. She'd been present for the first Bridgeway all-hands meeting, where she'd stood in front of 12 people in the Pearl District office and told them what they were building and why it mattered, and watched people listen in the way they listen when the thing being said is true rather than constructed. She'd been present for a Saturday in October when a pipe in her apartment building failed, and she'd spent 3 hours at Damon's while it was repaired, and they'd done nothing in particular. She'd worked. He'd done whatever he did on his days off, which was a combination of running, reading, and staring at things in the kitchen as if considering them, and Lily had been at Maya's. And the 3 hours had been so ordinary that she'd looked up from her laptop at one point and felt the full weight of how much she'd wanted this without knowing she wanted it. In December, on a Saturday that was gray and cold with the Pacific Northwest cold that is more damp than frigid, she and Damon walked along the waterfront. Not the tourist section, farther south, where the path was less curated and the river was just the river. They walked in the way they walked, which was without agenda, which was something she'd had to learn and was now something she did naturally. The particular gait of 2 people who are together and are not going anywhere specific and are fine with that. Lily asked me something last week, he said. About the fish? About you. He kept walking, hands in his jacket pockets. She asked if you were going to be her family. She stopped. He stopped a half step later, turned to look at her. What did you tell her? She said. I told her I didn't know yet, that it wasn't just my decision. He looked at her steadily, that we'd have to ask you. She looked at the river, at the gray sky doing what gray skies do in December in Portland, which is commit to it, no apologies. At this man who had crossed 25 feet of airport terminal for a stranger and who had never once asked her to be anything other than what she was, who had told her she could just show up, who had taught her by example what it looked like to be deliberate about the life you built, rather than the life that accumulated around you while you were doing something else. She thought about the question, not the quick answer, the real one, the one that had weight to it. She was 31 years old. She had walked away from a $14 billion company she'd built from nothing. She was 6 months into a startup that was finding its footing in the specific hopeful way of things that are built for the right reasons. She had a drawer in an apartment 4 blocks from her own apartment. She had been carrying a napkin narwhal in her bag for over a year, which was not something she'd planned and which she'd stopped questioning. She had been scared in an airport in Portland, and she had gone in anyway. She thought, there is no such thing as a perfect family. There is no version of this that arrives without work and mess and the specific difficulty of being 2 people with histories and habits trying to build something shared. Damon knew what he was carrying, the deployments, the loss, the loneliness that had lived in his apartment before she'd started filling it up with her laptop and her Thai food and her questions that didn't have easy answers. She knew what she was carrying. Neither of them was arriving at this without weight. But the weight was theirs. Specific, known, not hidden. That was the thing. She'd been in a relationship for 3 years with someone who had hidden the weight and let her carry something that wasn't real.
and she had survived the discovering of it, and she had done the hard thing, and she had landed here, on a riverfront in Portland in December, being asked by a man she trusted completely whether she wanted to be a family. There was only one true answer. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Tell Lily yes," she said. "Tell her I already feel like I am." He reached over and took her hand, the same as she'd taken his on the couch 4 months ago. Unhurried. Just that. They stood by the river for a while without talking, in the way of people who have used up the necessary words and have arrived at the place on the other side of them. Here is what is true, and what this story has always been about. The greatest victories in a life are rarely the ones that get documented. They don't go in the filings or the board resolutions or the press coverage. They happen in kitchens, on couches, on riverbeds on gray December Saturdays. They happen in the 25 feet between where you're standing and where something wrong is happening, in the decision to move rather than look away. They happen in the moment you tell the true thing instead of the managed version. In the moment you say, "I'm afraid," and someone says, "I know, go in anyway." In the moment you hand a stranger a napkin narwhal, and they carry it for a year and a half, and it becomes the talisman they didn't know they needed. What is easy to miss in a world that rewards scale and velocity and the performance of success is the value of the specific and small. The water that takes 90 seconds to warm up. The coffee in the French press. The child who corrects people about marine biology and draws stars for luck and asks if you're going to be her family with the same directness she brings to everything, because she hasn't yet learned that directness is supposed to be uncomfortable. Damon Cross, who had survived things that would have broken a different person, understood something that combat had taught him and fatherhood had confirmed. The mission that mattered most was not the one with a target or an objective or a defined endpoint. It was the ongoing one, the daily one, the one that asked you to show up imperfect and present and willing every ordinary morning in the specific life you'd chosen. Celeste Sterling, who had built something significant and lost the thread of why she'd built it and found the thread again, understood something that the board meeting had clarified and that Lily's napkin had illustrated. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to carry it forward. That what you choose to build, and for whom you build it, is the measure of what you believed in when it mattered. That a company can be the wrong thing to fight for. That the right thing is sometimes smaller and warmer and sits at a kitchen table eating imperfect pasta with too much garlic. That sometimes the best decision you make in a decade is to cross 25 feet towards something wrong, or to tell the truth in a room full of people banking on your silence, or to sign a lease 4 blocks from someone's apartment and call it home. Spring came the way spring comes in Portland, incrementally, then all at once, the gray breaking into something green and wet and startling. Bridgeway Medical Systems signed its 3rd client in March and its 4th in April. Vesuvius the fish survived the winter with excellent care and considerable commentary from Lily about his behavioral patterns. Priya hired 2 additional lawyers, which meant the legal team was now 3 people in a glass-walled office that was slightly too small and which no one was complaining about. Celeste gave up the Pacific Heights apartment in April. She kept a few things in storage, some furniture, the art she'd accumulated, the specific San Francisco life that she was not erasing but was not carrying forward into the next thing either. Priya found her a small place in the Pearl District that served as a work address for the California filings. The storage unit paid for itself. On an evening in May, she was sitting at Damon's kitchen table. Their kitchen table, because at some point the possessive had shifted and no one had called attention to it. When Lily came home from school and put her backpack on its hook and went to check on Vesuvius and then came into the kitchen and said, with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who has decided a thing and is now informing the relevant parties, "I told Maya that you're my family." Celeste looked up from her laptop. "I told her Celeste is kind of like I don't know what the word is. Not stepmother because you and Dad aren't married. But like that. She's a person in my family." Lily opened the refrigerator, assessed its contents, closed it. Maya said that was cool. "What did you say?" Celeste asked. "I said I know," Lily said. "I've known for a while." She pulled an apple from the fruit bowl and went to her room, and the kitchen held her absence the way it held everything, with the particular fullness of a space where real things happened, the ordinary and continuous accumulation of a life that had been built not by accident and not by plan, but by a series of choices made by imperfect people trying to move toward what was true. Later that evening, after dinner, after Lily was in bed with Vesuvius's tank, casting its small blue glow into the dark room, after the dishes and the easy back and forth of the kitchen, Damon stood in the doorway to the living room and looked at Celeste on the couch with her laptop, and he thought about the last 3 years of his life. What they'd contained, what they'd cost, what they'd given him that he hadn't known to want. He thought about the airport, about 25 feet, about the specific ordinary courage of moving toward something when everyone around you has decided to look away, and how that single decision had been the beginning of everything that followed, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest, because it was the truest thing about him expressed in a moment that required it. He had survived extraordinary things. He had done work in dark places that he would carry in the specific wordless way of people who have seen too much and learned not to perform what it costs them. He would have night shifts and difficult cases and the ongoing work of being a person who had been through what he'd been through. Lily would grow and push and test and need things from him that he wouldn't always know how to give. The company 4 blocks away would have hard months and good months, and Celeste would sometimes disappear into it in the way she did, and he would leave the light on and not say too much about it and wait for her to come back because she always came back. None of it would be smooth, none of it would be finished. It would be theirs. "Come to bed," he said. She looked up, closed the laptop. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." Outside, Portland went on in its ordinary way. The river in the dark, the lights on the bridges, the city that had been here before any of them and would be here after, indifferent to the specific lives being lived inside it, indifferent to what had been decided and what had been won and what had been set down and what had been chosen. The kitchen light went off. The apartment was quiet. Somewhere in the bedroom, on the nightstand, a folded napkin with a narwhal drawn in pen and a small star and the words, "Good luck. You got this," in uneven block letters. She didn't need the luck anymore. She already had what it was for.